A very good morning to you. It is 3 minutes after 10. Apologies in advance if we have a breakdown today. I can just sense the back of my throat beginning to welcome in the winter season. But we will warm ourselves up, no doubt, with a little bit of fireside chat. I didn't think we'd be doing this for a while, and it may well prove to be that we've jumped the gun anyway and are doing it too soon. But there are 2.5 stories combining to form the first question of the day. One involves Ursula von der Leyen, the European Union chief, the president of the European Commission, technically, to give her proper title, suggesting that the United Kingdom could be on a path to rejoining the European Union. It's an event in Brussels on Tuesday night. She admitted that European leaders had goofed up over the departure of Britain and suggested that the younger generation could and would fix it. Listen to her language. It's so interesting to hear how different it is from the language of warfare and toxicity that is so often adopted by people who dragged us out of the European Union and turned us into the first population in the history of humanity to impose economic sanctions on itself. She simply said, you have to fix it. We goofed it up. You have to fix it. So I think here too, the direction of travel, my personal opinion, is clear. And she talked about the Windsor Agreement, which remains probably the only significant achievement of Rishi Sunak's premiership, is fine-tuning and finessing an attempt to undo some of the Brexit damage done by Boris Johnson's so-called oven-ready deal, although you'll rarely see it reported like that in the newspapers that continue to cheerlead for both of them. And she described it as a sort of rapprochement among friends, although she didn't use that exact word. Let me get the exact phrases. I'll start being a bit more professional. Described the signing of the Windsor Framework, which of course amended the Northern Ireland Protocol, as a new beginning for old friends. Is that mad, isn't it? It really is. I don't know which one you'd choose. Who would you choose as a sort of standard bearer for leaving? And then here you have someone who is a standard bearer for the Union, for the Commission, and she describes the Windsor Agreement as a new beginning for old friends. No rancour, no vitriol, no toxicity, no hatred, no jingoism, no racism, no abuse, no fact-free faffing about. Just a simple statement. It's a new beginning for old friends. It can almost make you nostalgic for the days when we could have conversations about politics in this country without having to include sort of rancid contributors from the extreme fringes of political discourse. I certainly, before they demanded attention at every turn from every corner with their bogus victimhood and ludicrous othering. But so that's story number one. Sorry, I've gone off on a bit of a tangent, but you're used to it by now. The young will reverse Brexit, says EU chief, is how the Telegraph report it. The Times. While the Guardian says Sunak rejects von der Leyen claim that UK could rejoin EU, because of course he does, although Keir Starmer has made it clear he wants to improve relations. It is A, not clear how he would do that, except with further alignment, and B, he is certainly not making any noises that dyed-in-the-wool rejoiners would welcome or celebrate. So that's story number one. Story number two is some interesting YouGov polling. The transition period ended on December the 31st, 2020, you'll remember. So from January the 1st of 2021, it was real. YouGov has just asked, do you think, since then, since the transition period ended on the 31st of December 2020, do you think Brexit has gone well or badly? And 12% currently think it's going well, which is lower than the 15 to 20% of a population that you could normally rely upon to support a fascistic uprising. The 15 to 20% of the population that are being chased constantly by the various parties run by various sort of Faragist organisations, or the fella off Lewis who wasn't Lewis, or all of these parties all fighting for the same corner of the population. So 2%. And I mean, who the hell is in the 2% of the population that thinks Brexit is going well, apart, of course, from the editor of the Times, the editor of the Daily Mail, the editor of the Daily Telegraph, and almost all of their columnists. But outside of that curious little coterie, and the Conservative cabinet, of course, 2% of the population, with all of the usual caveats about polling, 2% of the population are persuaded that Brexit is going very well. And yet the narrative of most media in this country is either, from the people who encouraged you to vote for it, is either absolute silence and a claim that nobody wants to talk about it, which is weird because it would be a little bit like coming off the back of the World Cup win in 1966 and just 2 or 3 years later insisting that nobody wants to talk about it again, unless, of course, you didn't win anything, in which case you should probably put your hands up and say sorry. So 2% of the population who think it's going very well, and 10% think it's going fairly well. The figure for going badly, fairly badly 25, very badly 36, and then a few don't knows in the mix as well. Lemon and honey, I think, probably, more than coffee today. We shall see. That's story number 2. So von der Leyen, sorry, not Leyen, von der Leyen, thank you for correcting my pronunciation, pedants. Von der Leyen, essentially addressing the inevitability of it, but surprising me with the speed or the earliness of this observation. And then you've got the polling, which is surprising only insofar there are still 12 in 100 people who think that Brexit is going either very well or fairly well, which is a frankly remarkable figure. And on the other side of the scales, you've got 61 saying badly. But don't think that that means 61% of people think it was a bad idea to do it in the first place. Many of them remain convinced that there is a brilliant Brexit to be had. It just goes to a different school. And that is the problem with allowing hecklers onto the stage, is that when the hecklers get onto the stage, it turns out all they can do is heckle. So now the government is doing UKIP-style heckling at the government over the Brexit that has not yet been delivered because it doesn't exist, but which could exist if only you learn to believe more. The unicorns are due at platform 2 at 10:15. And then the third story, which it's a bit cheeky because it's one restaurant. But if you were listening yesterday, and if you weren't, then I want a letter from your mum explaining why by the end of morning break. The third story picks up on a lot of what we talked about yesterday. Yesterday, if you weren't listening, we picked up with the vacancies. I tried to look at the madness of Conservative immigration policy as they are constantly insisting that we need fewer people coming to this country, even as we learn every day about growing vacancies in various sectors. I mean, pretty much in all sectors. Is there a single sector in this country that's oversubscribed, do you think, where there are more applicants than there are jobs? I don't know. That's not a question for you to answer today. It's just a question about why we're having a simultaneous conversation about how awful it is that so many people are coming here and how awful it is that so many bosses can't fill vacancies. And we talked yesterday to people from the hospitality sector, to people from the industrial sector, to people from the veterinarian. We spoke to a veterinary surgeon down in Brighton, struggling to find staff. And that's a recurring theme, oddly, vets. And the protected sectors, the shortage sectors, include now what you might loosely describe as middle-class professions, architects, engineers, veterinary surgeons. So there's shortages everywhere, and yet the government remains dedicated to complaining about people coming here. And it is Yotam Ottolenghi today, the celebrity chef. Celebrity chef is such an odd phrase. He is a chef who happens also to be famous because he's such a good chef and he writes brilliant books. He's told The Atlantic that Brexit has led to a dearth, a much slower influx of Europeans coming to work with us. Jacob Rees-Mogg last week, I don't know whether you picked up on this, told the fruit farmers of Herefordshire and elsewhere to essentially pack up and find something new to do. Why do we need fruit pickers to come here when we can just buy cheaper fruit from places like China? Was the essential thrust of what he had to say. So even the people that told you everything was going to be brilliant, including for British farmers, are now essentially admitting that British farmers are facing a form of commercial oblivion. And on it goes. So those are the three stories that I've tied together this morning. The opinion poll from YouGov that shows just 12% of the population thinking that Brexit has gone well. The intervention from, and it's not an unprompted intervention, she was simply answering questions, so we can steer clear of any misogynistic or jingoistic abuse of Ursula von der Leyen, please. So she was asked a question about Brexit, and pointed out that relations continue to improve after their near collapse under Johnson and David Frost, and after some of the damage done by their ludicrous Brexit trade deal had been undone by the Windsor Agreement, which she described as a new beginning for old friends. That's story number 2. And a sense that the young will reverse it, and that the course towards realignment, or indeed reunion's a nice phrase, reunion's even a nicer phrase perhaps than rejoin, was fairly clear. And then the third bit, the continuing problems that we all are aware of. Unless you've got your head up your backside, then you will be aware that any employer in this country, whether they're running a care home or a veterinary surgery, is struggling to find staff. Restaurants closing, some of the most famous restaurants in the country running either close to calling it a day or shutting down for service, not doing lunchtimes on Mondays or Tuesdays, whatever it might be. Hugely, Jim says, oversubscribed areas. Podcasters, James. That is one profession where there is absolutely no shortage of applicants. You're right. Everyone I know's got a podcast now. Yeah, in fact, the cool people, it's like my new book. What you want to do, that a very rare unsigned copy of my new book is the same as finding someone who works even adjacent to the media who hasn't got a podcast. So there you go. And Matthew adds to the list on a similar theme, YouTube influencers. There doesn't seem to be any shortage of them. But you are not taking my question seriously. Well, you are, because I'm not asking that particular question. I'm asking this. So, to be personal for a moment, Brexit obviously has been something that I have found enormously saddening, occasionally infuriating, enraging even, and constantly engaging. I find it a psychologically and politically hypnotic that a population can be persuaded to do something so obviously stupid by some obviously awful people. But I always have contempt for them, the con men, not the conned. Compassion for the conned. Always compassion for the conned. Contempt for the con men, the broadcasters, the newspaper editors, the politicians. Compassion for the conned, who had little choice but to swallow it all. Okay? Daniel Hannan yesterday, one of the con men in chief, complaining about the Elgin Marbles story on the grounds that it would somehow prioritise nationalism over European community and cooperation. Just run that by me again. A senior Brexiter complaining that the Greeks, in pursuit of the return of their national treasures, were prioritising nationalism over international or European cooperation or community. Happy days, eh? Happy days. So, contempt for the con men, compassion for the conned. There it is. I thought we were at least 2 electoral cycles away from anyone even raising the spectre. And I have a suspicion that when it is raised, it could be the Conservatives that do it. It could be the post, if they lurch to the right after the next election, the return to the centre, at some point it's just going to become inevitable. And there is absolutely no guarantee that it would be the Labour Party, as opposed to the Conservative Party, that broke ranks first. It could easily be a new and as yet almost inconceivable iteration of the Conservative Party that simply says, with its traditional reputation for pragmatism and economic responsibility restored, simply says it is absolutely absurd not to be in the single market, which is simply true. But here's the question. Is it going to happen sooner rather than later? I'm very much on the side of later. I would say 20 years, simply because of the toxicity of domestic politics. But a lot of people have pointed out to me that there is going to be a population shift. You know, I'm not being brutal. I'm certainly not celebrating it. But people who are proven to be more likely to have voted for Brexit are going to pass away. They are going to shuffle off this mortal coil. And young people, particularly those who didn't have a vote in 2016, are overwhelmingly aware of the advantages of reunion. So as the dust settles, as we move on, as the wheels turn, as the world turns, those of us who, through a combination perhaps of caution and be careful what you wish for. Do you know what I mean? Like caution and optimism management. I'd love to sit here and say, I'd love to have sat here and said for the last few years. Ranjit says, please add fish and chip shops to your list of businesses that will be shutting down due to Brexit. And Ranjit's in Albury. They already are, of course. I would love to have sat here for the last few years saying, "Oh, it's going to happen. It's just start the clock. Tick tock, tick tock. We'll be reunioning any minute now." And I haven't done that. I haven't bought that at all. I've been very much of the view, I think, partly through pragmatism and partly through optimism management. I don't want to let myself believe that it is possible, because there have been so many disappointments electorally and politically over the last few years for people who aren't jingoistic or stupid and or conned, of course. And yet today, just a little glimmer, a tiny little glimmer, a little spark. Maybe it will be sooner rather than later. And I don't know what I mean by that. I can't put technical terms on sooner or later, but I can tell you that Chris is the first person in Idiot's Corner today. He says, "James, you're essentially saying that British businesses can't survive without importing cheap labour. How is that ethical?" Well, as I explained yesterday, Chris, welcome to Idiot's Corner. Before we left the European Union, it was actually against the rules to offer jobs at below the going rate for homegrown workers to workers from overseas. But since we left the European Union, that 20% reduction in the offer from the going rate for people who are already here has been enshrined in law. And in fact, I don't know how much attention you've been paying, but the entire conversation yesterday among the Tory party was about repealing it. So that you would no longer be able to offer lower wages to people from overseas to come here and work in the sectors where there are distinct and obvious shortages caused by, Chris, the Brexit that I suspect you voted for. So that's a nice early opening for Idiot's Corner. No doubt Chris will be finding plenty of people to keep him company in the next hour or so. So there it is, 20 minutes after 10 on a miserable, freezing cold Thursday morning. Can we warm the cockles of our collective hearts a tiny bit by wondering whether reunion with the European Union is likely to happen a little bit sooner than perhaps we feared. Sooner rather than later. 0345 6060 973. It is 23 minutes after 10. I told you Chris wouldn't be lonely in Idiot's Corner. Here's Mike. I'm sorry, but you're living in an echo chamber if you think that we will ever rejoin the EU. I'd love to call in to debate with you. Check out Omnisys polling, the lowest ever recorded support for rejoining the EU. So I did. Omnisys polling in August of 2023 tells us that 60% of Brits want to rejoin the EU. With nearly the same number saying Britain was wrong to leave in the first place. And the managing director of Omnisys, I accept, Chris, you may have a better grasp of the work that they're doing at the moment than the actual managing director of that company does. Brian Cooper says, since the beginning of the year, our Brexit sentiment tracker has hovered around the 60 to 40 mark of voters who think the UK should rejoin the European Union. We're seeing the same kind of split on the question of whether Britain was right or wrong to leave the EU. The data are interesting because we are now seeing a very stable and consistent message from voters that perhaps the debate over Brexit should be far from being done. But not in Idiot's Corner. In Idiot's Corner, the company that conducted the polling that the managing director is describing there is proof that asking this question is evidence of inhabiting an echo chamber. 10:24 is the time. Liz is in Cricklade. You've always said sooner, so you need to persuade me of what's changed.
Well, I have always said sooner, and that's because I work in food, and people who work in food can see that that is going to pull us back. We all need food, and it's getting shorter in supply. It's becoming more expensive. And that is the reason that was always the biggest reason why Brexit was the stupidest thing we could do, particularly coming out of the single market and customs union. But given the mess, and we've heard at this mess in the COVID inquiry, that this shower has made of COVID, why does anyone think they're going to do Brexit well? And what they've done to our food system is the most appalling mess you can ever think of.
Let me read you something from the Farmer's Guardian that you've probably already seen, but it is a counter to the point that you make. Jacob Rees-Mogg has failed to recognise the invaluable contribution of farmers and growers in domestic food production after comments made regarding seasonal labour on farms. Mr Rees-Mogg said the UK does not need fruit pickers and suggested cheaper fruit should be imported from abroad. So let's say you're both right, that we have completely decimated our own food production systems, but the solution would be to import lower quality, cheaper stuff, deregulated stuff from abroad.
But the problem with that, James, is that firstly, with Asia and the emerging market that it is, the competition on world markets is enormous. And as a small country, we are getting weaker. And added to that, we're getting poorer. So it means that we've got less clout on world markets. And the global food situation, because of war and climate change, is also contracting. It's dire. So it means there's less food to go around. So it actually adds to the weight to get back into where we belong.
But why does it? Because food security doesn't depend on single market membership. It depends on growing more ourselves, and we can do that anyway.
No, it doesn't depend. We've got a very difficult climate. We can't grow the food all year round.
They're growing haricot beans now. They're growing haricot beans in...
Andrew Ward is, yes, I've seen.
There you go. Yes, patriotic
that's
beans.
Very good. We can live on English baked beans. No, the damage we could have done, and if they'd really wanted it to work, they should have put a lot of effort into increasing food production here, because it would have made us sovereign. A country that cannot feed itself is not sovereign. And it's the reason why we joined the European Union in the beginning. We had the empire that fed us, and that happened because we repealed the Corn Laws in 1846. We then learned a very hard lesson in 2 world wars about food, and all of that was forgotten in a sort of mad night of Brexititis. And people have just been going around looking for something amazing to make it worth it. But as we're seeing, food is getting more expensive. Shelves are getting emptier. Christmas dinner is under threat again.
So,
we've
politely disagreed about this before, but more from a position, I think, you have an interesting blend of pragmatism and optimism, whereas I'm mostly pessimism and optimism management. It's because in the words of that famous film, it's the hope that gets you. I can deal with the despair, but I've weaned myself off hope. You have a different investment in it because you are in agriculture and in politics, for people who don't know. In fact, the next hour we're going to be asking about the Liberal Democrats. So you've used your call up now, Liz. You won't be allowed to ring in again. But
well, that's just as well.
Does your optimism increase? Are you more optimistic than you were last time we talked about this?
Well, look, James, you can afford to pay more for your food, and it's not probably hurting you anywhere.
Don't make it about me. I'm James O'Brexit. I want a reunion immediately.
No, but you're saying that you think it's, you're more pessimistic about it. I just see that the need for food is great. We all need to eat, and even if you are fairly well off, as people become more stretched
But will they join the dots? When I go into Morrison's and I see empty shelves that were simply not there 5 years ago, and I note inflation and I see increased prices in food, will people join the dots?
Well, of course they will, but, we're now looking at an implosion of the Conservative Party. Keir Starmer is going to be our next Prime Minister. He is not the same as Rishi Sunak. He is going to be responding to what's going on the ground. And that response is going to have to be urgent. And the destruction of food here is so great that we are not going to be able to come up to feed the British people. It's going to take years to recoup what we've lost.
So what's the sort of, I forget what the correct figure of speech is, but the sort of point of no return? What's the hump? What's the point at which the momentum becomes irresistible, do you think?
I think we're going to have, the food, as I've said all along, the food shortages are going to get greater. The food inflation is going to get worse. So
eventually people are going to clock that the diet has changed, the shopping situation has changed so much, and they will hopefully understand that it is intrinsically linked to membership of the single market. Thank you, Liz. Robert responds with, "What an absolute load of pure rubbish," says Robert, about Liz, a farmer's account of what is happening to agriculture. Robert, I suspect, is not a farmer. 10:30 is the time. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. It's 10:34 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I think fruit pickers are a really interesting emblem of bigger issues, don't you? Do you remember they were quite often cited as one of the examples of something that would be damaged by Brexit? And then, didn't the government... Sometimes I wonder whether I've actually dreamt things. Does that ever happen to you? Do you ever sort of... that little bit of hinterland when you wake up in the morning and you're sort of half awake and half asleep, and if you've got the radio on, you sort of mishear something, and you find yourself a few days later having a conversation, and you say, oh, well, of course, you know that there was a scheme to try and hire British people to pick fruit. And your mate says, no, there wasn't. What are you talking about? And you go, no, I'm sure I heard it on the radio the other day. Didn't the government announce a scheme to sign up British people We're going to train our own. We're going to sign up British, and they needed 10,000 people and 3 applied or something like that. Did I misremember that? I don't think I did. I think that happened. But they never mentioned that, you see. So Jacob Rees-Mogg then segues effortlessly and lugubriously to claiming the other day that the UK doesn't need fruit pickers. We'll just get cheaper fruit from abroad, where, of course, the standards of employment would be lower. The regulation of pesticides could well be different. And because we're no longer in the European Union, they would be allowed, importers would be allowed to bring in stuff that was considerably less healthy or less well regulated than the stuff that we would have been able to bring in as members of the European Union. But they don't. Do you see what I mean about the dishonesty of it all? You're sitting there thinking, oh, he's back on his Brexit hobby horse. But Jacob Rees-Mogg told you, A, that fruit picking wouldn't be affected, then that the vacancies could easily be filled by British people, and now that we don't need fruit pickers at all, because we'll be able to bring in pesticide-dripping plums from China? I don't know. Where would it even come from? If it's going to be cheaper, it has to be not abiding by the legislation that we abided by when we were in the European Union. The only way you can do it cheaper is by using pesticides that you're not allowed to use, or by having lower standards, or poorer working, perhaps a little bit of child labour, bring it in from a country with child labour. And yet no one notices. A quick word on why I love this job so much. So I'm reading that thing. I just read it to Liz in Cricklade. Well, you may not realise that Liz in Cricklade on other shows is Liz Webster, the chair of Save British Farming. And they ring her and they book her to come on. But she actually gets quoted further down the story that I just read to her. So I'm sitting here going, you may have seen the story in the Farmer's Guardian, and then quote it from the first 2 paragraphs, which is Rees-Mogg banging on about why we don't need farmers anymore, or fruit pickers. And then actually the quote in response to that is from the first caller that we put on the show today. Jacob Rees-Mogg says Liz Webster of Save British Farming is not only failing his constituents with his inflammatory anti-British farming outbursts backing foreign lower standard imports, but also the country as a whole. So is it going to happen sooner rather than later? Peter is in Oxford. Peter, what do you think?
Hello, James.
Hello.
Well, first of all, thanks for putting on Liz. She's brilliant as always.
She is, isn't she?
I agree entirely with everything she says. You and I have had this discussion, I think, on several occasions.
Well, we haven't, because I've always said later, not sooner, and today I'm thinking, could it actually happen a little bit sooner than...
That's what I'm just saying. Yes. I'm very pleased that you're shifting, and based on evidence, I think that's the right thing to do.
I may be shifting. I haven't shifted yet. I'm considering a shift.
Well, let me tell you why. I mean, first of all, mounting evidence, and if you look at the European movement's regular Brexit carnage briefing, there's every day there are more and more stories, the kind you've often put on your show, and then there's the Davis downside dossier. If you're wondering where to look, 1,000 or more reasons why Brexit has been harmful, and about 20 or so why it's been good. So I'd recommend people to look at that. That's the evidence. And it is more and more. And I think people are responding to that very understandably. I think often people respond to trivial things. Like when I was arriving at a foreign airport, an EU airport recently, and my Irish passport got me through the short queue. And I was looking at the UK queue, and I'm sure you've been there too. And I think people see that happening, and they see, gosh, Brexit's affecting me personally in my life. And of course, obviously the commercial things, but it's not just the commercial things. It's the whole. It's being looked at in a different way.
You feel stupid when you're standing in a queue that you don't have to stand in. And here's another Idiot's Corner entrance. Here's Dylan. He says, you're basically calling 52% of the country idiots. You're so obnoxious, it's unbelievable. The only reason we will probably go back in is because of the constant whinging of the 48%. 52% of us can't be bothered to listen to your incessant moaning, says Dylan, who is listening to my incessant moaning today and doesn't realise that the reason why they don't want to talk about it anymore is because 52% of the population are not idiots, although Dylan clearly is. The ones who don't want to talk about it anymore are the ones that can't face the evidence and the reality, whereas a growing number of people who do want to talk about it and do recognise the mistake that they made is the only available explanation for the continuing polling that we continue to see.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, the other point I was going to make is it's not 52% anymore, as you said yourself.
No, of course it's not.
And it's not just that people have changed their minds. Many have, and rightly so, because they've looked at the evidence. But it's estimated that between 2 and 3 years after the referendum, had the referendum been rerun, it would have gone the other way, because simply of demographic reasons. As you said, people have joined the electorate and others have left. And so it doesn't take a change.
So is that's the phrase I was looking for was tipping point, wasn't it? That's the phrase I couldn't think of. Tipping point. But here. So Jeff's crunched the numbers. Jeff's tweeted me to say the swing from Leave to Remain changes by 1.3% every year. This is I'm partly through people coming to their senses and partly through demographic change. So by 2030, which is the end of the next political cycle, potentially, it should be around 66.3% for reunion, and that's when parties will start putting it in their manifesto. Would you go sooner or later than the next? So we get this general election out of the way. I would have said at least 2 more, probably 3, last year. The suggestion now is that it could be the one after this. Would you agree with that?
Look at it as a step-by-step process. I mean, I think rejoining is, we're looking at 2 elections away. But I think an awful lot will happen in the meantime. And I think Labour are not being ambitious enough. The trouble is the TCA was badly negotiated. It was done in a hurry.
Yes.
It favoured the EU in many ways. And, of course, the EU aren't going to concede massively on things like veterinary standards and so on. There are tweaks to be made, but it won't be massive unless the UK actually looks more adventurously at things like rejoining the single market and customs union. And that's a step on the route. And I think that people will increasingly recognise that is the next step. And
who's going to resist it? Who, apart from people like Dylan, who obviously is struggling to do his shoelaces up at the moment, who's going to lead the resistance? This is what the tipping point is all about, isn't it? When the points that Liz makes and that you make become so obvious, whether it is the personal indignity of having to queue up to get into a country you didn't used to have to queue up to get into. Well, members of your own family, in my case, with an Irish passport, are smoothing their way through customs, or whether it is joining the dots on things like food prices or selling out our farmers. Who would lead the resistance? I mean, who would actually say we're better off being poor?
It's happening faster than we expected.
It is, isn't it?
Because, look at the years between 2010 and 16. There was a massive shift. Nobody in 2010 would have thought a referendum could go the way it did. And there was a shift in public opinion for whatever reason, and part of it was to do with I suppose the view of the European Union bureaucracy, and also to do with boat people in the Mediterranean and various other factors that happened to occur at the time that shifted public opinion far more than they would now. But the other thing to say is that the whole thing is predicated on a fantasy. When you talk about people who say that it's badly handled. We could have had a good Brexit if only.
I don't hear that so much anymore. There could have been elements of it that aren't as bad as what has happened. But you're right. The fundamental idea always comes back to the notion that you can leave an organisation with quite strict rules and benefits, and you can no longer have to abide by the rules, but you can still accrue and enjoy all the benefits. I used to say that on an almost daily basis, Peter, as you will remember. And yet still some people have failed to understand the impossibility of doing that. The gym analogy was perfect. We used to have so much fun with our analogies. Do you remember? Those were the days. Almost need a little bit of wistful music playing in the background now. What was your all-time favourite Brexit analogy? I liked, I don't know that I did actually come up with this, but I used it so often I persuaded myself that I had done. Getting the United Kingdom out of the European Union would be like trying to get the eggs out of a baked cake. I thought that was a great analogy. It's like being a member of a gym and no longer paying your membership dues, but turning up the next morning fully expecting to be able to use all of the facilities and the showers. And then the other one was when the negotiations were going on. And everybody said, it's like buying a car. You've got to be prepared to walk away. I said, yeah, it's like driving to the out-of-town car dealership in your old car, parking on the forecourt, going up to Swiss Tony and saying, hi, I'm here to buy a car. And then before he starts negotiating with you about what you're going to get on the new car, what the trim is going to be like, what accessories you have, what extras, what car, how many wheels whether or not it has an engine, before you start negotiating any of that, you go back to your old car and set fire to it. You drop a little match in the petrol tank. So you've blown it. So everyone's going, it's just like negotiating. I've been a negotiator. You've got to be prepared to walk away. So we've already set fire to our old vehicle. We've literally burnt it to the ground. And now you've opened negotiations with the people in charge of deciding what vehicle you get. Now, I mean, madness. I get a lot of messages like this, but I never accept the apology, Phil, in Shropshire. I'm 59, he writes, and I voted Brexit. I regret it every single day. I want to apologise to my fellow Brits for being a plank. I cannot wait to see us rejoin, and I hope it's sooner rather than later. You have nothing to apologise for. Another text pointing out it's not just fruit pickers. Byline TV, the Byline Times is an excellent media organisation, really filling some important spaces now on the newsstands and on broadcast content. They did an interview with fishermen in Cornwall who are expressing how cheated they feel as well. And you must resist the urge. You can call stupid people stupid. I think that's a freedom of speech issue. Very important. We've seen 3 today. We've had Mike, Chris, Dylan. No doubt there'll be more. They are stupid people. They may have the capability to cease being quite as stupid as they currently are, but if you're still clinging to the idea that this is all brilliant and it's all the fault of the people that told you it was going to be rubbish that it's turned out to be rubbish, then I'm afraid you deserve to be described as stupid. But for everybody else, including farmers who voted for it, including fishermen who voted for it, contempt for the conmen, compassion for the conned. Always remember that poor woman in Lowestoft who rang in. God, we're having a bit of a trip down memory lane today. Was it June? And she was part of one of Farage's parties. And she rang in and was talking about how we can do deals with this and deals with that. She hasn't stopped complaining since about how the fishing industry has been sold down the, pardon the pun, sold down the river by Brexit, but it was always going to be. That was the point. 10:46 is the time. 10:49 is the time. James in Coventry, you might be right. The best analogy surely was buying the box, James, with the picture of a toaster on the side, and when you opened it, it only had bricks in it. That was an early analogy. I'll put my teeth back in and try again. That was an early analogy, wasn't it? We only really got stuck into this after the vote. I don't know if you remember that. It's mad because it's become so completely associated with this radio programme, the fact-based dissection of what Brexit would really be as opposed to what was promised. But the box with the toaster on the side, everyone had been given a shiny new toaster. And they got home, opened the box, and it had a brick in it. And then everyone started claiming that they'd wanted a brick all along. That was the mad bit. That was the really crazy bit, wasn't it? When everybody started claiming that they'd wanted a brick all along. Or even, to extend the analogy to breaking point, or even that someone had swapped the toaster for a brick, probably Ursula von der Leyen, or that other fella, Jacques Delors, or I don't know, whoever it was that was responsible for doing that terrible thing, that someone had swapped out the toaster that they had paid for and been promised and voted for, and someone in the dead of night had crept into their house, unpicked the packaging on the shiny toaster box and put a brick in it. So that was quite a good one. Robin Enfield preferred the idea that the £350 million per week on the side of the bus was like deciding not to go to work in order to save on travel costs. That was another cracker as well. There's something quite poignant about all these pigeons coming home to roost, chickens coming home to roost, isn't there? So then there was room to dispute it, you know. People listening would even dispute it before we even opened Idiot's Corner. And they'd say, that's not true at all. I've got a shiny toaster. All right, I'm going to be really bad. I'm going to have a new hip that I wouldn't have got. There's going to be less immigrate, whatever it was. Whereas now, you can't dispute it, which is why the contempt for the common compassion for the con thing has reached the end of its shelf life. If you are still clinging to the carcass of this being a good idea, then your right to our compassion has, I think, diminished. Gilbert says, it's like turning up in your car, saying that you need to be prepared to literally walk away from a deal that would have involved part exchanging your car. You might need to think that one through a bit, Gilbert. It's not quite as pithy as the ones that we've already had. It's like turning up in a car to negotiate a new car, threatening to drive away, having set fire to your own car. That was the British negotiating position on Brexit. Alan's in Manchester. Alan, what would you like to say? Sooner rather than later?
I think it's later. I'm a Labour councillor, right. And I think that the party's position, it's the only thing I disagree with Keir on, actually.
Well, let me read what the position currently is. Further alignment wants to improve relations with further alignment on issues such as veterinary standards, which would cover farm, produce, fresh food, leather goods, fish and timber. The problem with all of that, as you will know, is that he can only really do things what's that word I'm looking for? Autonomously, but what's the other word? Like when we talk about nuclear bombs, when you disarm unilaterally, he can only do it unilaterally, can't he? Because they're not going to be coming back to the negotiating table anytime soon.
No, they've been scarred, and and I think what people realise that the campaign to leave was led by two of the biggest rogues ever in British politics.
Yeah,
that's Johnson and Farage, and why ITV. If anyone's why anyone's tuning in to, I have to be careful. It's a family show, James. Yes. Watching Farage, that con man, the biggest con man ever, and I do subscribe to the Byline Times and read all about him. And the Led by Donkeys do brilliant videos on just what
it's all out there. The evidence is all out there. It's all out there, and yet people choose to ignore it, up to and including the head of ITV at the moment, which is a conversation for another day. Why the pessimism? Why this? So the next election, no chance, but by 2030, if the numbers continue in the direction they're going now, 66+% of people wanting a reunion, someone will stick it in their manifesto.
Hopefully, yeah. But what I would like to see from a Labour government, and this, I would like to see an inquiry into Russian interference at elections, because that's never been looked at, and it's widely believed that all the social media posts, a lot of them, a considerable number, were via the Kremlin because it suited Putin. So I would like to see that from a Labour government to say, the referendum was fiddled with. We do have the proof.
Well, what they say to you, of course, is that no one has ever found any proof of Russian interference. Brackets, please don't mention that we didn't actually do an inquiry.
And that was it. That was the intelligence inquiry. And I think it was the SNP MP who was asked that question. And he actually said the remit of the investigation, we weren't asked to look for that. But, has anybody, what I said to your producer, has anybody rang in today with a palpable Brexit benefit?
Yes.
What have we got?
I've got two.
So,
Idiot's Corner, which we all enjoy.
Yeah.
And apparently soy sauce is cheaper, someone has told me.
All right. But I think what we need to do, and you're arguing...
Can you not just gloss over that, Alan? I know you're a proper councillor with grown-up politics to discuss, but could you please not just gloss over cheaper soy sauce?
Well, yeah, that is... Actually, James, that is brought up regularly on the doorstep.
Shut up.
Oh, yeah, people say to me, they mention potholes, bin collections, that tree needs pruning, and soy sauce. I was in
Manchester's famous Chinatown only yesterday, and the posters and the banners were everywhere. It was fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, but, it could go on forever. But I think what we need to do is, and I'm as guilty as anybody, and that is, what we've got to say to people is, not get on our high horse and just say, look, you probably voted, and this was in you've mentioned that Byline Times article, and They were in Brixham and Grimsby.
They were.
And anyone listening in, please subscribe to the Byline Times. It's brilliant.
I endorse this message.
I think what we have got to say, we've got to say, look, you were conned.
Yeah.
You might have voted for what you thought for the right reasons, but the evidence is there you were conned. We're going to have another referendum. And, to think of what I said to your producer, what people don't realise about the EU, it was the best peace project ever.
Well, that's one of the reasons why it was formulated. And what are the people doing who flogged us the departure from it? They're now going after the European Convention on Human Rights, which was probably the only thing that vies with the European Union as being a guarantor of peace in continental Europe, which is why it was originally conceived by Winston Churchill and others. But you already know all this, Alan. Hey, Alan, I've got something for you.
Come on, mate.
I've got a book record. Do you read fiction much?
Not really. I'm not a very good reader. I'm reading a book on hedgehogs at the moment, but go on, mate.
Well, that sounds interesting. Pretty good. There's a book. It's fiction, but you'll love it. It touches on the Russian stuff. It touches on Brexit. It touches on the political decline. I haven't yet recommended it live on the radio because I only finished it last night. It's only been out a couple of weeks. It's by a former MI6 operative, and it is called A Spy Alone by Charles Beaumont, and I give that 5 stars. That is one of the best books I've read in a very, very long time. So if you do want to have and it's one of those books that smuggles in knowledge and information via the tactic of an absolutely riveting plot. So I think you'll enjoy it.
I will do, but the other one I could recommend is actually a book by Luke Hardy called Shadow State, about Russian interference in elections and about Russian subterfuge.
Yeah, he was indeed on this programme talking about this book not long ago. Yeah. I saw Luke the other night. I think he's on his way back to Kyiv at the moment. But that fiction, just before you go, a whole book about hedgehogs.
Yeah, well, it's part of me. It's part of me. Well, they've declined enormously. So my portfolio
Well, that's half
of
a page.
environment.
That's half a page.
Yeah, and you know what I try to do is persuade developers, or we will do in the future when we get what's called a local plan. So when you build houses, put nesting bricks in for swifts, which have declined, and sparrows, and also hedgehog highways.
I've got a nesting box for swifts. Would you believe? The problem is,
James, I love you even more, mate.
The builder put it up when we had scaffolding, and now I can't.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, but I can't work out whether there's anything in it or not.
If swifts don't go in it, sparrows will. But I think
it's got sparrows in it.
The right way, mate.
I leant out of the bathroom window the other day, and it was a bit hazardous. And it looks to me as if there is some chafing around the entrance of the swift box. Do you see what I mean? It looks like it's seen some action going in and out.
You'll hear the swifts, but it's probably sparrows.
Well, I don't mind sparrows. And what I mean,
they've declined by 68%, James. They're on the RSPB red list now. The humble British sparrow.
That's the house sparrow rather than the tree sparrow.
Yeah, the house sparrow, yeah.
I like that. You glossed over my question there briefly, I think, Alan. You've got a whole book on the go that is about hedgehogs.
Yeah, it's called The Cry from the Hedgerows, I think. So I've got about a chapter in. Gosh. So it's part of my portfolio. And
I wish you well. I wish you well. When you're finished with the hedgehogs, go and read the... A Spy Alone by Charles Beaumont. A Spy Alone by Charles Beaumont. One of the best, and I read a lot of spy fiction, and it is one of the best I've read in a very long time. I am in the mood to continue this conversation for a bit longer, actually. We were going to talk about the Liberal Democrats and calls from 30 senior members, including, was Liz Quicklade one of them? I think she might have been. Anyway, but I'm just enjoying this, and I think we need a bit of help. Maybe Idiot's Corner is the wrong approach. Maybe we now start ignoring the rump of the Brexit support, because you could be listening to this and you could be swayable and you could be thinking, yeah, I did get it wrong and I am a bit sorry, but you keep lumping me in with people like Dylan and Chris and Mike, and I'm not that stupid. So maybe Idiot's Corner is unhelpful in this context. And how optimistic can we be that it might be an issue by the election after next? 3 minutes after 11. It's probably not the most professional thing I've ever done, but you're used to this by now. If you can find a clip, apparently I was on the news in Greece yesterday. They clipped a bit from the radio show of me talking about the marbles and the political problems, which I told you on Tuesday were going to get bigger for Rishi Sunak, because the more you thought about it, even if it was an attempt to throw a dead cat onto the table, the more obvious it was that it had really messed it up, leading me to the conclusion, for the first time really, that I'd fully clocked that he's not only bad at politics, he's also bad at populism. And you've got to be good at one of them to survive in this. Boris Johnson, rubbish at politics, great at populism. Liz Truss, rubbish at politics, briefly quite good at populism. And by that, I simply mean she was able to persuade the Conservative Party membership that the stupid deals she was signing were somehow A, brilliant, and B, a consequence of Brexit. Kemi Badenoch, she might, I don't know, she's currently not very good at politics, but that might be because of the company she's compelled to keep. But she's proving quite good at populism, because guess what she started doing? Signing absolutely meaningless documents and claiming that they're fantastic trade deals that can only be done as a consequence of Brexit. $1.3 trillion trade deal with Florida, with the state of Florida, trumpeted the Mail and the Express. Unfortunately, some of us read into the detail of it, and there was absolutely no trade negotiation there at all. There was a memorandum of understanding had been signed with an American state whose economy is worth $1.3 trillion. And the memorandum of understanding meant that Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, and the UK government would talk a bit about some stuff. That was it. So what has the media learnt? Nothing. What's Kemi Badenoch learned? Well, how to blow smoke up the tailpipe of the Brexit supporting population, which brings us back to Brexit. So if you can find that clip of me, if you can find a clip of me on the news in Greece, I'd be really grateful. I'd love to see it. I know that sounds a bit odd, and I don't normally do this, but I have a deep and abiding affection for Greece, and I do quite like the idea of having popped up on Mega Channel or whatever it may be. So if anyone can find that, there's a rare unsigned copy of my new book in it for you, or a signed one if you insist. But they're 10 a penny. 6 minutes after 11 is the time. Speaking of 10 a penny signed copies, I'll be at Foyles tonight on Charing Cross Road from 6 o'clock with a bunch of other authors, including Ian Dunt. So bring your swear box, and we will all be signing copies of our latest books for you to put in your Christmas stockings, or to give to the Brexit supporter in your life, or indeed the slightly more simpatico family member. 6 minutes after 11 is the time. So we carry on with this conversation. And Claire says, you do need to keep talking about this. We've got to bring people up to speed before the next election to give us any chance of going back in. And you don't need to have a deep understanding of the issues. You just need to have just need to lick your finger and stick it in the air, see which way the wind is blowing. That demographic figure of 66.3% by 2030, if the traffic continues moving in the current direction at the current speed, and I can't see any reason why it would slow down. I can see several reasons why it might speed up. But you have both people acknowledging their mistake and new people and younger people reaching the age of majority, reaching the age at which they are able to vote. And 66.3% by 2030. If you were going into a general election in 2030, although it's more likely to be 2029, isn't it? Or even 2028. But I mean, what do you reckon, genuinely? What do you reckon? Because I would have said probably 2040 at the earliest this time last year. Now I'm genuinely beginning to wonder whether the direction of traffic will change. And you need to remember, it depends a lot on them as well. It depends a lot on them saying, yeah, we will sit down and negotiate with you. And they're not going to do that until it's ceased to be a hot potato in UK politics. So that is another perhaps cause for pause. 8 minutes after 11 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. So what do you reckon? Is it feasible in the next 1 or 2 electoral cycles that reunion is back on the cards? I'm going to need some convincing. Tommy's in Chester. I've had a lot. What's happened in Chester, Tommy? I've had loads of calls from Chester this week for some reason.
How you doing, James? You okay?
I'm all right. Are the tellies on the blink or something like that? Why is everyone tuning into LBC?
I think, well, that's funnily enough, that comes to my point. I just want to say thank you.
Go on.
I voted for Brexit.
Yeah.
And so now, because I was misinformed. Now, I've been listening to you for a while, and I've tried to think of arguments when I was against you, but I couldn't do. And I thought, well, you're either very clever or you're right.
Or both. So, hang on a minute, I could be both.
You could be both. So what it is, what it is I think because you're telling the truth, I think what it is, I know what it is now, you're telling the truth, and because you're telling the truth, the truth will come out. An example, what's happened with Brexit is that was based on a lie. Now, if anything based on a lie will come out eventually, because it has to. Now, see, my solution, I think it's good news. I think we will rejoin because it's just based on economics more than it is anything else, more than anything overtly complicated. And I can appreciate that economy is a very complicated subject. I appreciate that, but it's basically quite simple. So if people at the bottom, i.e. the working classes, can't spend money,
yes,
the economy will crash. I mean, if everybody can't spend money, of course it'll crash. But if they can't work or there isn't enough places for them, the economy in and within itself will crash. So they'll have to come back in. Now, I don't need to give a simple.
It's not simple. It's not simplistic. But will people join the dots though? That's the problem. And
yes.
Really, because I'll talk if I was on the opposite side of this and still inflating the barrage balloons of bloviation and nonsense. Okay. I'd be talking about Ukraine. I'd be talking about COVID. Yeah. I'd be talking about the rest of it.
Right. So what? Okay. So I think because it's just going to come to they're going to have to. Because you quite rightly said, we haven't got enough people in doing jobs, working in the economy. So it's going to come back to that point where, well, we need people. So just based on that and that desperation, yeah. I mean, it's going to come down to that. You see, I mean, and that's where it's going to come down to. And so in that respect, it would be time to be optimistic. Because it's just coming down to the human nature.
So we're talking about a tipping point. We're talking about a point at which, even if there are still people banging on about sovereignty, then it will be just drowned out by people banging on about reality.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, that's perfectly correct.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just down to, and I don't mean to oversimplify this, because you can't often get. But the thing is, this problem happened, Brexit happened, because somebody tried to, but I haven't got time to go into it now, but people who we know tried to give a simple answer to a complicated equation. And the thing is, Boris Johnson didn't even want Brexit. No. He did it so he would appease the old school Tories, so he could become leader.
Well, he's a really good example of what you said about it doesn't matter how much effort you put into pretending it's not there, insisting it's not there, trying to create, but eventually gravity will get you. And because everything about Johnson was built on lies, eventually it fell apart because he carried on lying. He lied again. It wasn't the Brexit lies that did for him, but it was the Brexit lies that got him into the position where his further lies about parties and about Chris Pincher and you name it, he lied about it. It has to fall apart eventually, and that's where you get your optimism from.
Well, yes, it's based
I like
on...
that.
Yeah, and that's what it's just. So it just comes from that because I mean, when me and the lads used to listen to you when we were Brexit, we try and listen and we try to think, well, where's he gone wrong?
Yeah.
And because I will, if I'm wrong, I'll admit it.
Yes. Same.
That's just because I trying to be mature sometimes.
Well, there's no point. There's no point having a mind if you never change it, is there?
Well, that's it. And you've got to look at it and you've got to think, well, hang on. You see, and you're quite right. There's different people. Some people voted for Brexit obviously they thought it was the best thing to do.
Yes,
and yes, there were some people who maybe had another agenda and whatnot. But when you're not given the full information, like if I said this, how I win, not even win arguments, but how I won people over is this. Okay, you've got a hardened Brexit supporter, like I don't know, someone who's a fan of what's he called, Steve Baker.
Yeah.
Is that him, I think?
Hard man of Brexit, Steve Baker.
Right.
Give him his full name, please, Tommy.
And you say to somebody, okay, brilliant, you support Brexit, come and work for me and I'll give you 500 quid a week.
Yeah.
Okay, you can work for me after a week. I'm sorry, lad, there's only 200 quid. But you say 500, I know, but I got it wrong. So listen, keep on working for me. Okay?
Yeah, I like it.
And they go, well, but just because when you put something in somebody's terms and you make it real to them, then somebody go, well, you said 500. I said, no. But that was just
but we can't give you that because of Ramona's or whatever it was. We can't give you the 500. We can only give you the 200 that we promised you.
Don't you worry, James. There's a free sandwich on Saturday.
Hang on a minute. Just to really put the cherry on the icing on the cake, I've just got a text that says, I'm not sure if you're watching I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. Take a wild guess. So, no, I wasn't aware of this. Fred Siriex, who we're big fans of, asked Nigel Farage for a benefit of Brexit, and Farage said, and I quote, we have a submarine deal with Australia. So there's your free sandwich on Saturday.
Oh, there we are. Well, that's good. I mean, so does that mean that we're going to have a better submarine? Does that mean...
We're going to have with your accent, we're going to have a yellow submarine.
We certainly can, my friend.
That's where it's going to be. Oh, dearie. Thank you, Tommy. And for people getting in touch to say that we shouldn't have compassion or we shouldn't be accommodating for people who voted for it, Tommy is a perfect example of why I disagree with you. Because civilised, intelligent, thoughtful people can always find ground and can always admit that they've made a mistake. 14 minutes after 11. Well, actually, just coming up to 11:15. I think I've found where someone sent me the clip, but you've sent it via text. I don't know if I can access it. Have we got it? Happy days. Well, we'll play it out after this. 17 minutes after 11. There's no rhyme or reason to the when somebody in the public eye passes away. There's no rhyme or reason to my decision to mention it or not mention it. Sometimes I finish the show and think, oh my days, I forgot to talk about so and so who passed away. Other days we mention it, and it's not necessarily somebody who registered on my personal Richter scale of recognition or admiration. But I'm just saying that. So it's far from infallible. But I did watch Brookside a lot as a younger man, and I did find Dean Sullivan's portrayal as Jimmy Corkhill absolutely riveting. I was one of those soap characters that was almost part of the fabric of your existence, like a sort of Jack Duckworth or a Vera or a Hilda Ogden, So I mentioned that he's passed away very sadly, very young age, and love to his family and friends. Brookside was a huge show, wasn't it? So it's the only one really, because I don't think Albion Market or El Dorado count. They never got into the fabric of the nation in the way that Brookside did, and then suddenly it wasn't there anymore. 90 minutes after 11 is the time. Hi, James, writes Jack in Manchester. On the day when we voted to leave the UK, I made a £20 bet with a friend that we'd be back in 10 years. because the Leave campaign was based on lies. Every year I wish I'd raised the bet to something higher. I still think you're going to lose, mate, because that's 2026. There's no earthly way we're going back into the European Union in the next Parliament. But what about the Parliament after that? What do you think, given the direction of traffic, the aligning of planets, and the burgeoning reality of what we got as opposed to what we were promised? I just wonder. And I'd like some pessimists, or indeed some people who are adamant that it would be a terrible thing to do and that we're better off poorer and in all these sort of situations where things have got measurably worse, but there are benefits that, like this submarine deal, which quite a few of you are pointing out, involved us sort of putting us in a position where the French will never trust us again. But anyway, who's aware of it? It's a half-truth at best. It's a deal between the UK and the USA to supply submarines to Australia by 2040. I wonder who gets the bigger slice of that, says Michael. 20 minutes after 11 is the time. Martin is in Margate. Martin, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I'd like to say that the idea of going back into the European Union, I want to realise here they have to be asked first.
Yeah.
A lot of people in Europe will
you did say asked with a K, you said then, didn't you?
Yeah, well.
Yeah. Because it did sound, just on the phone line, it sounded like you might have said something else, as in they had to be bothered. But sounds like asked. But just to clarify, you definitely said they'd have to be asked first. So the decision lies with them, of course.
The decision lies with the European Union. And a lot of people, like Rishi Sunak, he snubbed the Greeks,
yeah,
and everything, and it has to be a unanimous decision. And people think about the AUKUS deal.
Hang on a minute, I just that thing. Wait there. Hang on a minute. I'm just going to cross live to Greek TV to enforce the point that you just made.
Η δημοσκόπηση του YouGov έδειξε ότι το 66% των Βρετανών πιστεύει ότι η άρνηση Σούνακ ήταν λάθος, ενώ μόνο το 11% απάντησε ότι ήταν σωστή. Το 22% απάντησε ότι δεν γνωρίζει, ενώ ο Βρετανός Πρωθυπουργός έγινε ακόμα και αντικείμενο χλευασμού από δημοφιλή ραδιοφωνικό παραγωγό.
Rishi Sunak is sitting in a room at Downing Street, admiring his own ankles, which is presumably the only reason why he wears his trousers so short. So he's sitting there admiring his ankles, and someone says to him, you'll never guess what old Mitsotakis has done. And someone else says, well, I presume he's mentioned that the Greek government is quite keen to see the Parthenon marbles return to Athens because A, they've built a museum for it especially, B, George Osborne's been making quite encouraging noises recently, and C, it has literally been the Greek government's position for longer than you have been born, Rishi Sunak.
Το Βρετανικό Μουσείο ανακοίνωσε ότι θα δανείσει την περίφημη ιδρύα του Μηδία, ένα αρχαίο ελληνικό αγγείο που χρονολογείται από το 420.
I can't believe they included the bit about his ankles. Anyway, sorry, Martin. That's the story you're referring to there, being covered on the Greek news last night.
It's a few things, like the AUKUS thing. People think that they've gotten away with that. The French haven't forgotten about that.
No, but with a different government, in place.
I'm beginning to think de Gaulle was right in the 60s.
They never should have let us in the first place. And you, of course, speak from a perspective as an Irishman of being a member of still being a citizen of a country that is in the European Union. 23 after 11 is the time. Well, listen, I don't know who says no. That's the point. Idiot's Corner aside, and my reservations about Idiot's Corner being an agent for bad rather than good in the context of these conversations, who says no, we can't possibly go back in? Who actually says that in a way that could be taken seriously? I genuinely don't know. 23 minutes after 11. So my optimism is growing. Actually, not obviously this electoral cycle, but possibly in the next one or two, whereas I would have said 3 or 4 not long ago. Nick's in Worcester. Are you going to rain on my parade, Nick?
No, I'm going to agree with you, actually. She's not unusual. Listen, first thing, I've run a couple of times, but first thing I've got to say is thanks for everything you do, James.
That's very
please
kind.
Keep it up.
You're very kind, thank you.
My thoughts are, Labour will win this election, and they won't do any major shift during this Parliament.
No.
I think what he's going to do is slowly... and not quietly, but slowly and craftily, well, that's the wrong word, but he's going to try and align us a little bit more in every sort of aspect that he can. to demonstrate the difference to the people that are still, what you'd say harder thinking, so not convinced they did the wrong thing. So during his first Parliament, he's going to get, as close as he can, demonstrate the change in, cheaper food or whatever it may be. And then I think in the following election, that's when he's going to be putting it on the manifesto, because by then you're going to get a lot more noise about rejoining or reunion, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I think you might be right. And there's two elements to this which need to be understood in concert with each other. I did an event on Sunday, and my old editor from my days on the Express came up to me afterwards and said, "You got that a bit wrong," and she was right, actually. So the regulations... The way you sell the regulations to the public as a bad thing is by describing them as foreign. So, Rees-Mogg doesn't care whether a regulation is good for the population of this country or not. He just tells them it smells a bit French, or the Germans have to abide by it as well, and therefore it's wrong. So you do it in a jingoistic way. But they also hate the regulations because they apply very lightly. They apply brakes on rampant profiteering. So, minimum wage legislation, health and safety legislation, food safety legislation, workplace safety. So that you can align with that without having to be crafty. You can just explain this is better for the population, and the people who wanted to get rid of those regulations wanted to make you less healthy and less safe and less secure because that would make them richer.
Yeah, I totally agree. But
yes,
the only
I know.
people who are hearing that, James, are the people who are listening to your show. So until that starts getting called out more widely, and what the Jacob Rees-Mogg's benefited from leaving, and what the other hedge fund managers benefited from leaving, until that gets put on the BBC, and until that gets put in, the rags that people are reading on the Mail, it's not going to change.
Well, you say that, but the numbers are shifting the direction of traffic, and this show used to be quite famous for people ringing up from the opposite, from the other side of the fence, and they've gone a bit quiet in recent years. So I don't know. You could be right, and obviously up to a point you are indubitably right, but who I don't know what the numbers are changing measurably. They're moving quite fast. Even the Telegraph yesterday had a story in it about how it may have been by someone who who didn't swallow the Kool-Aid in the first place, because a couple survive on the business pages or something like that. It's the comment pages of the Telegraph that are a bizarre combination of hilarious and diabolical. But the news pages and the business pages especially continue to publish some brilliant journalism, and they're just describing it in very cool terms about all the bad stuff that has happened and will continue to happen. So, I mean, obviously I wish there were more outlets that were telling the British public the truth about Brexit from 2016 onwards, but, we've got to work in the world that we inhabit. Thank you, Nick, and take care. 11:27 is the time. Dave's in Oxford. Dave, what would you like to say?
Hello, mate. Well, I don't know about raining on your parade, but I might have a little shower.
Go on.
So I just don't think you're taking into account with the figures of people that have changed their mind. I just don't think you're taking into account the Project Fear that would be around.
That would come back
over
again.
The next Parliament. Yeah, and also the deal that we had originally was quite preferable in some terms. The agricultural rebate that Thatcher negotiated. And the other thing that's going to really bring the people that have come over to the light, the thing that's going to really push them back over to the dark side when Rees-Mogg and his mates start jumping up and down about it, is the fact that we're going to have to ditch the pound and go to the euro. Any new membership has to take on the euro. And that's
I've looked into this. I think you can actually get around that.
Oh, really? You think they'll let us in on not new member
Well, I
terms?
think you need some sort of treaty commitment to look at starting the process. But we could be a bit like the French are and not actually follow the strict letter of the law on these kind of obligations. So we've definitely started the process. Then they come back in 5 years and say, how's it going? And we say, it's going great. Yeah, it's going great. See you then.
Yeah, that's interesting. I do, I do hope that is the case, because
But otherwise, you're right. The idea of having to sell the single currency to people who've already voted to impose economic sanctions on themselves by prioritising emotions over evidence would be a very, very tricky task.
Yeah, I think that is going to be the tipping point for most people that have come over to the.
What would it look like? What would reunion look like?
What's the deal going to be? And that's what I mean, I voted to stay, but if the deal looks absolutely terrible going back in. If the
it won't though, because there's three things on the table, Dave, actually, which we sometimes forget. You've got the old deal, the new deal, and then you've got the status quo. So all that the New Deal has to be is measurably better than where we are at the time that we're offered it. If it's not as good as the one that we had before the status, but do you see what I mean? And then the world has turned, hasn't it?
Yeah, no, you're very right. But I can't. So the only things I can think of off the top of my head are the agricultural rebate and ditching the pound.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there's a whole host of other things that we negotiated previously that were very good. That we
this was why David Cameron was such a catastrophic contributor to the national decline, because he not only thought that he was capable of lancing the boil of Euroscepticism in his own party, but he also thought that he could waltz over to Brussels and come back with some sort of goose that lays golden eggs. When we already, as you described, when we already had from a Eurosceptic perspective, we had a better arrangement than pretty much any other country in Europe.
Yes, and I don't think they're going to let us in with anywhere near those terms that we were on. Why would they? If we come crawling back, then why are they going to give us anywhere near those terms?
Well, that's why I thought that's in fact one of the reasons we're talking about it today, because of what von der Leyen said. And she is only one president of the European Commission at one point in history, but her words are warm and her rhetoric is encouraging, and that perhaps gives some pause to those of us who think, crikey, they'd make us jump through all sorts of hoops. Paul in Taunton supports my point by saying Poland made this commitment prior to 2005, James, on the single currency, and they're still on the zloty, and Hungary's not in the euro either. So I don't know that it is quite the deal breaker we thought it was. I am going to keep Idiot's Corner open for a little bit longer. Here's someone. How about all the people who voted stay move to Europe and all the leavers stay here? We would have no housing problems, empty hospitals, no unemployment and no immigration problems. Nobody would want to come here and we would have a win-win situation. Well, because you voted to abolish freedom of movement and you've already got 110,000 vacancies in the NHS and an incredibly disproportionate number of people from overseas who are working there. So you'd have no NHS. And then you force me to remind you about the research that was published recently into the average intelligence levels of Leave voters versus Remain voters. So you'd have a brain drain. You'd essentially see an exodus of almost everybody clever and expert, even if they were allowed to do it, which they're not because you abolish freedom of movement but are too thick to remember. So, you see, you send me texts like that and I've got to open Idiot's Corner again, and I really don't want to. Matt Hancock, speaking of idiots, has been giving evidence to the COVID inquiry. We'll find out what he's been saying after the very latest news headlines with Thomas Watts. It's 24 minutes to 12. It's Thursday. Mystery Hour on the way shortly, of course. Back to the COVID-19 inquiry, where Matt Hancock, remember him? Star of stage and screen, but he was a politician once, and indeed he was Secretary of State for Health and Social Care when the country found itself caught in the claws of COVID-19. He's giving evidence as we speak to the COVID-19 inquiry, but Charlotte Lynch is here to bring us up to date with what he has said thus far.
And he was asked quite early on, was the Department for Health up to the mark in terms of infection control? And his response was simply one word, yes. And that, I think, sums up the evidence that he's been giving so far. Essentially, the message from Mr Hancock is he, as Health Secretary in the department he ran, of course, the Department for Health and Social Care, did everything they could. And they were up to the mark with it. They were on top of it early. And it was what he called a toxic culture within government that blocked them from taking action. Now, he said he and his department faced what he called a deep unpleasantness from the centre of government during those early months of the pandemic.
From the middle of January, we were trying to effectively raise the alarm. We were trying to wake up Whitehall to the scale of the problem. And this was a problem that couldn't be addressed only from the health department. Non-pharmaceutical interventions cannot be put in place by a health department. A health department can't shut schools. It should have been grasped and led from the centre of government earlier. And you've seen evidence that repeatedly the department, across the department, and I tried to make this happen. And we were on occasions blocked, and at other times, I would say we were. Our concerns were not taken as seriously as they should have been until the very end of February.
Now, he said that you've seen evidence, and this is what Hugo Keith Casey, the chief counsel to the inquiry, is trying to get to the bottom of, because it appears from his point of view, actually, there isn't much evidence to back that up, and all the evidence we've heard so far from others, mainly those diary notes, those nighttime diaries from Sir Patrick Vallance, showing, what he'd written from his evidence, the meetings that he was having showed the Department for Health and the government as a whole didn't have a grasp on it until late February, early March. But Matt Hancock suggesting there that from January, he was this driving force. He was the one that wanted the government to go further and do more. He was asked whether he had displayed nuclear levels of overconfidence, in the words of former civil servant Helen McNamara. He said that he'd had long discussions with some advisors about how we were responding, and said, I felt it was my professional duty to keep going, to try and keep driving forward. Again, something he's been repeating. He was the one pushing forward, but the government position, he said, was not yet. He said, I'm a team player. I respected that. But he said then it came to March. Whitehall eventually woke up, and he claims that that's when he started to face criticism.
I think that the toxic culture that you've seen at the centre of government, that's been subject of much discussion, was unhelpful in assuming that when anything was difficult or a challenge, therefore there was somehow fault and blame. That is a part of the toxic culture that we've seen, and some of these exhibits that you've just shown demonstrate a lack of generosity or empathy in understanding the difficulty of rising to such a big challenge. So, did the DHSC need to expand and grow? Of course. Did it get everything right? No, of course not. There were, no doubt, we'll go into individual challenges. But did it rise to the challenge overall of responding to the biggest public health crisis in a century? I think it did.
Does he know that other people have been giving evidence?
He does, or he should do at least anyway. I don't know if he has been following it as closely as the rest of us have. But yeah, as you say, that is completely contrary to everything we've heard so far. And as I say, this is what the Chief Counsel to the inquiry is trying to get to the bottom of. Was he pushing as hard as he says? We've been shown messages between Matt Hancock and Boris Johnson on the 7th of March 2020. Boris Johnson texts Matt Hancock to say, "You are doing great. Keep going. Anything I can do to help?" Matt Hancock replies saying, "Kind of you to say, it's not easy. You're doing great too. Follow the science," he says. Yes. And then he talks about how he thinks that there should be some public messaging about, this national unity and everyone stepping up and doing their bit to support the elderly if they have to stay at home. He said, "This is a great unifying call for you to lead when the time is right." Boris Johnson then replies saying, "OK, let's talk Monday. I'm off to the rugby." And Matt Hancock says, "Excellent, enjoy." This is on the 7th of March 2020.
So 2 months after he was urging the government to go further, and but around about the time that he was giving the all clear to the Cheltenham Festival race meeting as well.
And
how bizarre.
He also claims that he first told Boris Johnson that we needed to lock down on the 13th of March 2020. Now, Hugo Keith Casey very helpfully...
That's the last day of the Cheltenham Festival.
Yes.
Sorry, am I jumping on Hugo Keith's sandwiches here?
Very helpfully, he's got a copy of Matt Hancock's pandemic diaries, and he's got it with him. He's been reading directly from it, and within it there's so many annotations. You can see the post-it notes sticking out the top of points he wants to raise. So he addressed directly with Matt Hancock whether he actually did, and where the evidence is, that he did tell the Prime Minister that there needed to be a lockdown on the 13th of March.
Your book says the account that follows has been meticulously pieced together from my formal papers, notes, voice memos, my communications, WhatsApps, we know from the press, and it records in 555 pages all the relevant, important events as you saw it concerning the coronavirus response. But there is no reference to you telling the Prime Minister to call for an immediate lockdown on the 13th of March. And you know that there are no notes and no emails in the inquiry's possession, because we've given them to you, that records that conversation. So I am required to ask you, how sure are you that you told the Prime Minister that he had to call for an immediate lockdown in a call on the 13th of March?
I can remember it, and it came to light in looking forward to this inquiry. And what's more, the corroborating evidence, if you like, is that it is recorded that on the 14th, which was the Saturday, there was significant discussions in number 10, at which I made this case again.
They took a short break just before we came on air, and it was the first thing that Matt Hancock addressed when they came back after the break. He said, can I just make this point? It was once I've been researching to give evidence to this inquiry, is when that's come to light. That's when it's not in my book. And Hugo Casey just said, is there any evidence anywhere that you told Boris Johnson this on the 13th of March? And the answer was essentially no.
There is no evidence at all. Well, there is, but it goes to a different school.
Well, quite right. We should say that Boris Johnson, we've learned this morning, will be giving evidence to the inquiry next week. All day Wednesday and Thursday has been blocked out for him.
What a time to be alive. Sensational. How much longer of Hancock must they endure?
Until 5 o'clock this evening, roughly.
OK, so you'll be popping back up on LBC, no doubt, later this afternoon with further updates. But I guess that's the big bit, isn't it, so far, is that I said we should do it on March the 13th. Have you got any proof at all of that? No. None whatsoever. Charlotte Lynch, thank you. 11:45 is the time. Always keep the receipts. 11:49 is the time. Do you remember when Honest Bob Jenrick ordered the removal of murals in a child acceptance centre for child asylums, unaccompanied child asylum seekers? Honest Bob Jenrick turned up there, still an immigration minister, remember, and saw these cartoons on the walls and ordered that they be covered over, as far as we can tell, because he thought it was making everything too welcoming. So what would happen is that desperate children who'd risked their lives to cross the channel, some of whom had been orphaned in the process of fleeing their original countries, fleeing the civil war or the famine or the floods in their countries of birth. What Honest Bob Jenrick was worried about was that they might get to Britain and then phone home and tell all the other orphaned children in Syria or Afghanistan that there were some Mickey Mouse cartoons on the walls of the asylum centre in Dover. And that, I think, Honest Bob Jenrick's calculation was that might prompt all of the other orphaned children in some of the world's most benighted locales to try to make the journey to Britain. And so he ordered that they be painted over. We were talking about it on air, excuse me, when a cartoonist called Guy Venables, who works, as all cartoonists do, at many organs, but I think Metro was the one that I'd mentioned. We were talking about it on air when Guy Venables rang in with some interesting information. It is 22 minutes after 10. I can tell you, if you're worried about the state of human nature at the moment, that a cartoonist called Guy Venables, I know some of his work, Private Eye, Spectator, we won't hold that against him, Punch, back in the day, is trying to put together some sort of joint effort to replace the murals, to put up new paintings at the refugee centre in Dover. We wish him well, but I presume he'd need permission from the Home Office, and the Home Office minister who ordered the murals to be painted over is your friend and mine, Honest Bob Jenrick. Guy's in Chichester. Guy, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi. I'm the cartoonist who you mentioned earlier, who I offered my help and of the help of many other
Guy Venables.
Cartoonists. And he, so...
Have you had any comeback? What have you done? Because I know you've had a lot of your colleagues, your cartoonist colleagues have already said, yeah, count me in.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had feedback. I mean, I've had offers of help, thousands of offers of cups of tea and lemon meringue pie and things like that from locals in Dover.
Okay.
Obviously, there's red tape involved in the actual us going into a children's centre in the first place.
Of course.
But also, as you mentioned earlier, I mean, it started off as a no-go, really, because, of course, they're in charge of
Well, that's what I thought.
Jenrick's obviously in charge of the whole thing, and it would be, politically sort of tinder fire if we went in and just went over it. But what they have said is, could we keep in touch with them and do some work for them just to help children understand English and, sometimes using cue cards and things like that and all sorts of stuff like that. So something good has come out of it in the end, but possibly not what we were hoping for in the first place.
No,
and there's a little bit of, it's added people, it's given a little bit of hope to people at least.
Yes.
That, not everyone's awful.
Why this one? Why was this the story, Guy, that made you sort of think, this isn't, I'm not going to draw my way out of this one, I'm going to do something else?
Well, no, I mean, we were, the whole, as soon as I saw it and realised what Jenrick had done, I just was so appalled by what he'd done, and also the fact that it was cartoons. I knew that we could fix it. I hadn't really thought it through, obviously, but I had such a positive response from all the other guys in the PCO, in the Professional Cartoonists Organisation, and they pitched in. But the trouble is, Jenrick obviously, he has great scoops of his soul missing, so there's not much you can do about that.
I look forward to seeing your next depiction of him. Well, they couldn't, as we established, get the murals replaced for various reasons, not least the fact that honest Bob Jenrick didn't want them replaced. So the Professional Cartoonists Organisation, as we've heard, came up with a different idea, which Clive Goddard, who chairs the PCO, is here to tell us about now. What have you done?
We've made a colouring book.
Fantastic. The great British colouring book. Tell me about it, Clive.
Well, we named it the Great British Colouring Book because we wanted to make it as inoffensive as possible to the people who might keep us out of these centres. It was a very, very delicate situation, as Guy was just explaining, and the only way we were going to get in there was by being completely apolitical. So I wrote a brief. Actually, it was my wife's idea. I should give her credit first. We were talking amongst us. She's the treasurer of the PCO.
Okay.
And because we couldn't get into the centre, she said, why don't we make a colouring book and print them up and send them? And we all thought that was a great idea and jumped on board. So plan A was that we were going to get this little colouring book done with about 40, 50 pages. So I emailed everyone on my list, all the membership. And it was very positively received, and the offers kept coming in, all these little black and white line drawings. But I wrote the brief saying, no politics, this is for kids.
Okay.
We want it to be accepted, so keep it light and fluffy. And then I thought, let's make the theme Britishness, and so that then the objectors would have nothing to object against. And we called it the Great British Colouring Book, and Britannia on the front with a cup of tea and a pigeon. That's drawn by Harry Harrison, by the way. He's a British guy that works in the Hong Kong paper. So we've had people from everywhere wanting to be involved,
pulling together.
And nobody said no.
No, and the destination of the books has it worked?
Yes, obviously we're just a small bunch of cartoonists. We're not a major organisation. We had no idea how we would do that, the logistics of it, and luckily we paired up with 38 Degrees.
Yes, the campaign group, more than 1 million people who just kind of tried to do lots and lots and lots of little things in the hope of making big changes.
Exactly. Yeah. So their 1 million supporters were approached to do a bit of fundraising, and they raised a huge amount of money in order to print this first batch of books. And they also had access to the Refugee Council people who had access into the centre, so that was a way in. So the distribution and the printing was covered by 38 Degrees. We just had to do the design and layout and the rounding up of cartoonists to get some content.
Well done. So the children arriving, having had their welcome rendered, I know you don't want to get political, but the facts of the story merit repetition. They'd had their welcome rendered less warm by Robert Jenrick's decision, have now had a little bit of warmth reintroduced into their existences, because they will be the children who get to colour in these fantastic pictures, including contributions from over 50 cartoonists, including Terry Gilliam and Quentin Blake. And now you're extending the opportunity to members of the public, to me, to everybody can get hold of the book now. Tell us how we do that. How do we do that?
Version 2 of the book is actually over 100 cartoonists now, because contributions kept coming in after we'd finished the first book. So we thought, well, let's make a bumper version of it and flog it to the public. But it's going to still raise money for the Refugee Council. from the sales. And it's, again, being distributed through the 38 Degrees website, which I think you're sharing on your Twitter page.
Yes, we will do, definitely.
Yeah, it's a ridiculously long URL, which I wouldn't be able to read out.
Or I suppose you can just Google the Great British Colouring Book and various links will pop up on screen as well.
Yes.
But I'll make sure that we're covered that. Would you mind if I bought one and sent it to the Home Office, or would that undermine the purpose of the project?
Not at all. I'm sure they'd love it. I think some of the people at 38 Degrees are going to be sending copies out to various MPs for Christmas prezzies.
What a lovely idea. Thank you for doing this, and thank you for talking to us today, Clive. It's nice to see the story come full circle from when Guy rang into the programme a few weeks ago. Lovely stuff. And you can get hold of the Great British Colouring Book via 38 Degrees or simply by Googling it. It is right, we're very short on time because Mystery Hour is just around the corner, and I do want a quick word on that breaking news regarding RMT members accepting a pay offer. Henry Riley is on the line. Will both sides be claiming a victory here, Henry, or is it clearer than that?
No, I think both sides very much claiming a victory, but for different reasons, James. So it's an 18-month industrial dispute. It's been going on, as your listeners know and as you know, just for an incredibly long time, within a sustained period of strike action over pay and conditions. Now, let's just enjoy this rare moment of warm words between Mick Lynch and Mark Harper. They haven't always seen eye to eye, but Mick Lynch saying his members have spoken in huge numbers to accept this offer, but reiterating that it was only come about because of sustained strike action. He says it proves sustained strike action and unity gets results. However, Mick Lynch also adds, we will never shy away from vigorously defending our members' terms and conditions now or in the future. So warm worms, but also sort of a warning shot to Mark Harper, who's also described it as welcome news and a significant step towards resolving industrial disputes. Now, your listeners, James, may be thinking, well, this is good news. This is all over. 18 months of strike action finished. Not quite. So this essentially is the RMT seeking to renew their sort of strike action. In spring, we may well be in another place. So what they've accepted is 5% effectively. What that means, in essence, is in terms of sort of lump sum, RMT members are likely to get £1,750 as well as that 5% pay offer. For instance, if you earn £31,000 working for the RMT, in the first year of this, you'll get an extra £1,000 a year. However, what is in the small print is regarding redundancy, something which Mick Lynch has spoken about on a number of occasions, and there are no compulsory redundancies until the 31st of December 2024. So I think what we're likely to see, James, is this time next year, if that deadline of redundancies does loom, I don't suspect Mick Lynch will be as warm with his words, as accommodating. So respite for now, but I suspect if the issue of redundancy is still looming, he and his members will be back out on the picket lines.
So it's not game over, but it is good news for travellers, essentially, in the meantime.
Good news in the short term, absolutely, for travellers. And of course,
except for ASLEF. ASLEF are going to continue with industrial action.
Exactly. From the 2nd to the 9th of December, ASLEF are on strike. Mark Harper's used this as an opportunity to say the RMT have accepted it, you should get around the table. But they've got very different concerns. So I suspect any deal between them and the Department of Transport, if done, would have to come with essentially different terms and conditions.
Henry Riley, bringing it in bang on time as well, which is particularly important on a Thursday because Mystery Hour is next.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Mystery Hour with James O'Brien.
It is 3 minutes after 12 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where your weekly opportunity to achieve the sort of satisfaction not ordinarily available anywhere else on your radio dial is about to unfold. The way it works is this. You might have a little question bubbling away in the back of your brain. It doesn't really matter how silly it seems to you or how personal it is. I don't like generally questions about motoring, but even that has mellowed over the years, as I have mellowed over the years. But what I'm trying to say, if you're new to this, is there's no real rules. Something is puzzling you and you think there must be an answer to that puzzle, and that somebody among our audience of geniuses will probably know that answer, then ring in and ask. That's it. I mean, there it is. That's Mystery Hour. There are some housekeeping I must do at this point. There is a prize available for my favourite contribution of the day. That's it. That is the only... It looks like they're sold out of that colouring book at the moment, so rest assured I will bring it to your attention as and when there are new copies of it available. And we probably will, before the end of this hour, make a little mention or pay a little tribute to Shane MacGowan, who was so much more than just the Fairy Tale of New York. Beautiful, beautiful song though that is. But before all that Mystery Hour, my favourite contribution of the day will win a Mystery Hour board game. And with Christmas just around the corner, the Mystery Hour board game, 7 of which I signed at my event in Manchester on Tuesday night, a new record, is going to be particularly welcome. You can find out more details about the game at mysteryhour.co.uk. You can buy it there, but touch wood, you might win one by providing me with either my favourite question or my favourite answer in the next 50 minutes or so, 52 or 3 minutes or so. And I think that's it, really. Full terms and conditions are at lbc.co.uk. And we will, I think, crack on. We'll start in Newcastle. Dean is there. Dean, question or answer?
This is most definitely a question, James.
Carry on, Dean.
But, James, before my question, can I just thank you for your solidarity and support that you show us firefighters? I had to get that out there.
Yeah, thank you. You can, actually. I normally get a bit kind of... I fully take that, and it's my absolute pleasure to continue to do that. Thank you, Dean.
Thank you very much. Okay, so, James, do you drive? Oh, sorry, it's a motoring question, by the way.
Oh, no. How's that been allowed to happen?
But you got to hear it.
Go on, then.
Got to hear it.
God, dear.
Okay.
Go on.
Do you drive, James?
Well, yeah. I mean, not a lot, because I live in London and I go everywhere by public transport, but I have got a driving licence and a car.
Do you share your car with Mrs. J.O.B.?
Yeah, I mean, it's her car, really. She shares it with me.
Okay. All right, well, for the likes of myself, I don't share my car with anybody else. Right?
All right, yeah.
And this question popped up in my head a few days ago, because I've noticed that my car settings, the seat settings, the rear view mirror settings, it's the same. It remains the same. Nobody else touches it other than me.
Yeah.
I find every single time, and it's only in the morning when I first go into my car to drive, before I pull away, I find that I've always got to readjust my rear view mirror.
Okay.
Now my car isn't parked on a volcano. You can't blame Buntsville. There's no vibrations to reset the mirror.
So you get into your car having no one else has got into it.
Having no one else got into it.
And you get into your car every morning. And lo and behold, you need to readjust it to...
Yes.
Okay.
It's almost
I'm not going to lie to you, Dean. It's not my favourite question of all time. But it is intriguing. What if it's only you? What if no one else gets into it and everyone says it's only you? Maybe you've got some weird condition and your height oscillates overnight. You shrink a bit. You shrink a bit in the night, and then you sort of expand back to your original dimensions in the course of the day.
Either or, whether I shrink or grow, my mirror should be permanently facing the ground or permanently facing the ceiling by now.
So and it's a significant adjustment. It's not like a tiny little, just like almost an affectation.
I will say at least about a centimetre adjustment, easily.
All right.
Easily.
Okay, you're on. Yeah, I'll put it on the board. There's going to be words after the show about how on earth this got put through on the motoring grounds. It's not your fault. It's a breakdown in communication in the top team of operatives. But you're on. Okay, why does Dean need to readjust his rear view mirror, every morning, even though he is the only person that drives a car? Dean, take care and thank you for everything you do. 8 minutes after 12 is the time. Finbar is in Salisbury. Finbar, question or answer?
It's a question, please.
Yes.
The question, I have relatives in both Bournemouth and Brighton, which I visit regularly. When I walk along the pier or the beach or in Brighton, I notice that the seagulls are quite significantly more aggressive than not only Bournemouth but any other beach. I wonder what's occurring.
Have you been to Padstow?
In Cornwall?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I once had a Cornish pasty torn out of my hands by a seagull in Padstow.
Yeah, in Brighton, I saw 3 attempts at food in the one day. Successful dive bombs.
So your thesis is that the seagulls in Brighton are more aggressive than in other seaside resorts, and you want to know why?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure if there was a big dust-up between the Padstow Seagulls and Brighton, I would imagine Brighton would win, but...
be like the T-Birds in Greece.
Yes. I think there's a significant difference.
Well, just thinking out loud, it would be interesting to know which was the busier promenade. Are people more likely to be wandering around Brighton eating tasty snacks, and therefore the Seagulls have become bolder because the rewards are greater, or the opposite? You know, what could it be? I mean, is it likely to be a measurable phenomenon, even?
Is it factual as well? I mean, it's my subjective experience, but I mean, am I making this up?
Well, or hallucinating. Actually, I'm going to work on the principle that you're not making it up, because that would be a grave betrayal of all that Mystery Hour stands for. So there it is. And if so, why are Seagulls in Brighton more aggressive than anywhere else? That's going to open a can of worms, isn't it, really? Rob's in Newcastle. 2 Newcastles in 3 calls. Rob, question or answer?
Question.
Carry on.
How did the non-darts player in Bullseye prove that their skills were inadequate enough to qualify as a non-darts player?
Yeah. Well, sometimes they were very good at darts. You've misunderstood, would you believe, the central premise of that process in that game. Because the non-darts player was there to answer questions. So there was no reason why they couldn't be brilliant at darts as well. But you would be on a hiding to nothing if they were rubbish at answering questions. So you've automatically shrunk the pool from which you're going to pick your non-darts player. Think of them not as a non-darts player, but as the question answerer. So you need your best player for darts. You get them first, right? And then you get your cleverest, your cleverest mate. And if the clever mate is good at darts, there's nothing to stop them from being there. But if they're not good at answering questions and you've prioritised the darts over the questions, you're out in the first round, Rob.
But the thing was, I always thought, why, if you were a really good darts player who's really good at questions, the non-darts player appeared to be rubbish at darts every single time. No,
sometimes they were really good.
They were? I'm not sure about that.
They needed to be to win. You had to be quite good at darts to get to get all the prizes, to get a really good chance of winning the speedboat, even though you lived on the 14th floor of a tower block. You had to have a fairly good chance of the 3 darts that the non-darts player threw landing in the red, not the black.
Yeah, but I don't recall seeing that many.
Well, you're going to have to trust me.
Well,
there might not, but there weren't many. There weren't many.
Enough that I watch repeats on Challenge sometimes, and I'm telling you, I haven't seen a non-darts player do very well with any level of frequency.
Doesn't have to be frequency. I only have to find one to prove my point, and my point is that there is no test of their poorness at darts, because they have been hired for their brilliance at answering questions.
Yeah, the only thing is, I just always thought, why don't you just get an Eric Bristow, Bamba Gascoigne on, who could do both? But I just don't.
Because Bamba Gascoigne's darts are gonna hit the cameraman.
Yeah, but they're supposed to be rubbish at darts.
They're not supposed to be. This is the fundamental premise that you're falling down, and they're not supposed to be rubbish at darts. They're supposed to be good at answering questions. They're 2 very different propositions.
I just think that they would have to have demonstrated. So all right. So what if you had that someone did some research and they found out that it was like the top player in the local darts league, and I bet they'd hold him to account.
He wouldn't be the top player, would he? Because he's with his mate who's better than him.
Well, all right, but let's just say that they were in a darts league, and that
they were. Some of them were in the same darts team.
Really?
Yes.
Do you know that for a fact?
Yes.
How?
What?
How do you know that?
It came to light when I was preparing for this inquiry.
I just think, and the other thing is, if we are going to get someone who
got that joke, did you get that joke? That was a good joke. That was a topical joke. That was a proper. That's the answer that Matt Hancock just gave at the COVID inquiry, Rob.
I've just been missing out a bit on the older
word
COVID inquiry
word for word. We only got it 20 minutes ago. I've just turned it into a darts-based joke. That is genius. even though I say so myself.
That's
but
why you get paid the big bucks.
It is why I get paid the big bucks. But they did, sometimes they were in the same darts team. So, we could do this all day. But your fundamental... Go on.
One thing, the only other problem with this, I suppose, is we're potentially relying on the answerer to be from a generation who's participated in Bullseye, which
true.
Is a big ask. But nevertheless, there may be someone
I am right. Of that I am certain. But I will leave it on the board. I did make the mistake of presuming that Tony Green had followed Jim Bowen to the great Oki in the Sky just the other day. That's probably where your question came from, actually.
No, I've been storing it up for a long time, but I knew it'd ring true with you being from a similar generation to me, and
big fan of Bullseye.
And I could tell you, I could tell that. So I thought it might.
I'll put it on the board. All we need is someone that competed on it. But as you say, that will possibly be a smaller constituency than we might all hope. Also, not necessarily a particularly fit cohort of the population, the darts enthusiast, although that's changed a little over the years. Rob, thank you. How did they, or rather, I think we'll change the question, did they do anything to check the darts skill level of the contestants on Bullseye that were there for their brains, not their darts skills? And all we need is to find one person that went on it, and the answer will be no, for the reasons that I've already explained, but I won't give myself a round of applause yet, because that would be a bit presumptuous. In one.
Mystery Hour on LBC with James O'Brien. Call 0345 6060 973.
It is 19 minutes after 12 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Why does Dean need to adjust his rearview mirror when he gets into his car in the morning? I know this. I've worked it out since he asked the question, and I was quite close, but not quite close enough. So but not quite an open goal there, but there's a lovely round of applause up for grabs and, of course, a chance to win the Mystery Hour board game. Are Seagulls really more aggressive in Brighton? And if so, why? And did they do anything to check upon the inadequacy at darts of the non-darts playing partner in a Bullseye quiz team? So that's slightly one for the ages there. But one of my younger colleagues looking at me with an air of befuddlement. But as Dave reminded us, you can watch repeats on Challenge TV. 20 minutes after 12 is the time. Steve's in Fleet. Steve, question or answer?
It's a question.
Carry on.
Like most people, I have a wheelie bin, and embossed in the lid, or on the lid, as part of the moulding, it shows the year of manufacturer, it shows a CE mark, and below that, it shows 95 dB, lowercase d, uppercase B, which you will know stands for decibels.
I know the answer to the question you're about to ask, but carry on.
Why would my wheelie bin have a noise rating?
Yeah. Well, we finished our Brexit conversation, Steve, in the last hour.
What's Brexit got to do with my wheelie bin?
Well, I think you will find it was a European Union regulation introduced to manufacturers of wheelie bins to put a limit on the amount of noise a bin could make while being wheeled along or having its lid shut.
Well, 95 decibels equates roughly to that of a motorcycle.
Not quite. It's closer to a food mixer.
Anyway, that's
I think. Are you sure it's 95, not 91?
It's 95.
That's quite high, actually. But also lawnmowers. There were limits put upon how much irritation you could cause your neighbours with anything from a bin to a lawnmower. It was one of those pesky laws that we were required.
I know lots of noise-making things have that marking on them.
That's the answer.
It just seems extraordinarily strange for something that is so quiet as a wheelie bin.
No, not really.
95.
Are you kidding? Can I ask what kind of house you live in? Do you live on a busy street or are you in the sticks?
In a quiet cul-de-sac.
Well, I mean, you when the bins get done in the morning, I mean, it depends partly upon the bin operatives and how much care they're taking not to disrupt But if you've got an early collection, you flipping well know about it.
We do get early collections, yes, but 95 decibels is loud.
It is loud, but it's not. You're not going to build it. That's the limit that you can go up to. Ideally, it'll be half that, won't it? But the point is, you can't go any higher than that. So it means they have to use a different composite of plastic, or they have to have slightly higher quality wheels, or whatever it may be. This is the answer, and it's one of those weird things I picked up when we were talking about Brexit every day. Because people would ring in and I'd say, what laws are you looking forward to not having to obey anymore? So I thought, well, I better find out whether there are any actual laws that people might find a little bit restrictive.
Your explanation sounds very feasible.
It was not feasible. It's completely factual.
But 95 decibels is much too high.
Yes, but it won't be 95. That's the limit. You can't go any higher than that. And very few bins will go near it. But they've got to put it somewhere, and they've put it there. If you get a bin lid and you slam it down as loud as you possibly can, then you're going to be getting close probably just in that tiny moment, as opposed to with something that's on permanently, like a motorcycle engine or a food processor. In that tiny moment, if it was a needle, it might just spark up to 91, 92, 93, but it's not allowed to go above 95. But no one's going to be standing there slamming a bin lid up and down for 10 minutes, are they? Unless they're weird.
So as we've left the EU now, can I grind it off?
No, it's better than that. You could make one out of cymbals. You could get a bin made out of cymbals, mate. You could get a bloody great cymbal instead of a bin lid and just smash it down as loud as you want all day. And that's freedom, that is. Do you know what that is, Steve?
What's that?
That's the sound of sovereignty, mate.
Okay, well, I think you've answered the question.
I have.
But,
I'm having a round of applause as well. No higher than 8 decibels. Those are the rules. 24 minutes after top. I cannot believe that little bit of information that I must have filed away around 2016, 2017 has finally come in useful. Although I thought in my head it was 91 decibels. Thank you, Steve. Everyone's going to check their bin tonight. Alex is in Kingston. Alex, question or answer?
James, hi. It's an answer. Hopefully, an answer.
Carry on. Whoa, phone line. No, we'll come back to you. Your phone line's gone very funny since we put you through. Not your fault, not our fault, nobody's fault. Claudine is in Barnet. Claudine, question or answer?
Question, please.
Yes.
Why is it when you have the flu that your joints and your muscles hurt and the soles of your feet? Why is that? I know it's inflammation, but why does it make them hurt?
Everything hurts.
Everything does hurt, but why?
I don't know. It's a great question. Well, let's have a think. We should know this, shouldn't we? Your immune system is going into fighting the flu virus or the cold virus, and therefore your natural pain. No, it doesn't really work, does it? I'm good on bins.
No.
Ask me something about bins.
No, I've got all my bin questions answered already. But my cousin was not very well in Korea. She's had the Korean flu, and we were trying to work out this question. So if somebody medical...
why does everything ache when you've got a flu? It's a symptom of flu rather than a side effect, an actual symptom. But the question still stands, doesn't it? Why would a cold virus make your soles of your feet ache? Thank you, Claudine. That's a nice question, and it is on the list. 0345 606 0973. If you can answer it. Let's go back to Alex in Kingston. Alex, question or answer?
James, it's an answer. Hopefully you can hear me this time.
Carry on.
Yeah, so you're taller in the morning than you are in the evening.
Oh, yes.
When you stretch out in bed, your spine elongates by only a couple of centimetres. And so when you sit in the car, just think about it. Just think about it.
No,
it's got to.
No.
You think.
Well,
So
we know, if Dean was here,
rear window.
if Dean was here, we'd have to ask him whether he's adjusting it up or down. And I think he'll be adjusting it up, and you think he'll be adjusting it down.
No, you'd be adjusting it up. If you're taller, you need to adjust. You need to tilt it up, don't you?
Yeah, but he will be shorter at the end of the day.
But wasn't the question that when you get in the car in the morning?
Yeah, but when you get out of the car. So I think it is because the chair has sunk. I think he also adjusts it during the day, don't you? And then he adjusts it back in the morning.
No, so I've noticed it in the morning. Well, I say no.
It's because the chair, you've sunk into the chair. It's more likely that it's the sinking into the chair that has caused it than the actual expansion of the body, surely.
I think it might be a combination of the both, because you are definitely 2 centimetres, give or take, taller in the morning than you are in the evening. 2 centimetres? Give or take. That's why when anyone asks me how tall I am, I say I'm 5'10" straight out of bed.
Are you serious on that? I don't think this is true.
100%.
So what is it? Is it gravity? Gravity forcing us down that makes us get a bit shorter in the course of the day?
Exactly. Yeah, 100%.
Well, stop saying 100%. It's clearly not 100%.
93%.
52%. 52% shrinking, 48% the chair. So
no chance.
as you approach the end
your
of the
height does
day,
vary quite a lot.
yeah, well, all right, okay. So you park up at the end. You're driving through the day, a slow process of the mirror no longer being in an optimum position because you are both shrinking and sinking. So you're shrinking and sinking, but you don't really notice it because it's incremental. But when you get into the car the next day, you're at both optimum height and the seat is at optimum foam expansion, and you think, crikey, I'll just adjust that slightly, and then it's back to optimum mirror position. No, but then it would. But then you'd be doing it every day. Then you'd be doing.
But I do it every day.
Yeah, but twice.
It every day.
But do you do it twice every day?
No, not twice every day. I normally get out of the car.
Well, now it would be horizontal. It would be facing the floor now. It would be because you're doing it a centimetre downwards every day, and you're never putting it back up again.
No, you kind of. I kind of scoochy in the seat a little bit because during the day because it's tiny increments, isn't it? And
but you're doing the mirror.
You've got the biggest.
Yes.
You've got the biggest differential.
Yes, but the mirror is being adjusted. No, stop. The mirror is being adjusted every day. So by rights, it would have done about 3 full circulations by the end of July.
No, it's like leap years. Eventually, you'll adjust it once or twice, and it'll catch up with itself eventually,
adjust it back
and then you'll
again.
adjust it back up again. Yeah,
no, but
in the morning, where there's the massive differential, and you get in, he might not do it every single day.
He said he did. He said he
might
did.
Notice
He said he did it every single day, and if he's not adjusting it back at any point in the day, then shrinking and sinking doesn't matter at all, does it? It makes no sense.
Well, maybe. Yeah. Well, I think maybe. More likely, he's mistaken about doing it every day than the fact that
or he hasn't noticed
need to do it,
or he hasn't noticed that he's readjusting it in the course of the day. That's more likely.
Possibly.
I think that's more likely. But we'll go with shrinking and sinking is the answer as to why your angle on the mirror is different in the morning than it is when you get out of the car in the evening.
I think so. Yeah.
Also, you slouch a bit. You slouch a bit as you get sleepy and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think I described it as scooching down in the seat. You do adjust your seat position throughout the day in your car, I think.
You can do.
I've noticed it.
Do you think this is true from Jess in Brockworth? I used to work at Disneyland, and we often had to disappoint small children who were not quite tall enough for a ride in the morning, but then, no, they were tall enough for a ride in the morning, but then they were too short when they came back later in the day.
They would have been really close to start with.
Yeah, but you would be. They're quite strict about it, aren't they? So if it could be up to an inch, 2 centimetres, you said.
I went to Legoland the other week with my daughters, and they were pretty liberal, if I'm going to be honest.
Yeah, but Legoland, they're not like, Disneyland. Some of the rides at Disneyland are a bit more hardcore than the rides at Legoland.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, I'll give you a round of applause. Shrinking and sinking, and I've got no reason to believe that Jess is yanking our collective change. Could also be a looseness in the mirror hinge. This is why I don't do motoring questions, because I just said the phrase, a looseness in the mirror hinge. Oh, you've got a loose mirror hinge. That's why we don't do motoring questions on Mystery Hour, because you just made me say loose mirror hinge. Amelia Cox is here now with the headlines.
Mystery Hour with James O'Brien. This is LBC.
It is 12:34 and this is Mystery Hour. The rearview mirror question, I think that I am satisfied with that answer. However, questions that still need answers include the bullseye question, the aching muscles question, and the seagulls question. I think that's the lot. 0345 606 0973 is the number you need if you can answer any of those, or if indeed you have a question of your own. Eli is in Jerusalem. Eli, question or answer?
It's a question, James.
Carry on.
First off, can I just say, it's been quite hard times here in Israel.
Well, I was going to wait for you to reference that, so I'm glad you've done that.
Right, and especially today there was this terror attack, and just thinking this mystery hour came, and it is just a bit of hope and happiness. So
gosh, what an amazing thing to say. Thank you, mate, and stay safe.
So I just want you to know that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Okay, getting on to the question. I wanted to know, is there any sort of limit that you can have in a memory? So say not as in getting older you start to lose your memory, which is something you reference quite a bit, but I'm talking just we think of memory as your brain if you think of it as an SD card or a memory drive. Is there a limit to how much knowledge you can cram in before tests, before it's too much?
You mean as a human memory,
Right.
Like got gigabytes or petabytes or whatever you'd call it.
Right. I understand over a course of time you could obviously amass knowledge, but like, could we say like, in one sitting or something? Is there like a limit or?
Yeah. No, I love the question. I think something happens. There's two different types of memory. Someone has explained before on Mystery Hour where you might not. You said I can hit 4 o'clock today. I won't be able to remember what we did in the second hour of the programme, but I will be able to remember what I had to eat on my wedding day. Do you see what I mean? There's like two files. One for short term.
So, like I was discussing this with a friend, and he was suggesting perhaps the reason that why older people do start losing memory is because they're
full.
Like at the point that
it's full. I love that. The memory's full. Sorry, I've no idea. My memory's full. I don't think so, but I'll get you a better answer than that, Eli. I promise.
If you could.
Well, I can't promise. I'll do my level. I can promise to try, and you do take care of yourself. And I hope things are. Well, obviously, we all hope things are better where you are sooner rather than later, Eli. A sobering contribution. Thank you for it. Gary is in Catford. Gary, question or answer?
It's a question, James.
Yes.
The question is, various breweries produce a dark beer that they refer to as IPA.
It's not that dark.
Well, darkish. But it's my understanding that the IPA is an abbreviation for India Pale Ale.
Yeah, so it's not dark then, is it? It's a pale ale.
Well, okay.
It's darker than a lager. But it's not as dark as a stout or even as about the same. But anyway, it's a pale ale, an India Pale Ale.
India Pale Ale. Well, yeah, so I suppose I'm using the term generally darker than lager and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But, what the question is why is it referred to as India Pale Ale? What's the connection with India? Is there some kind of historic connection with India where that IPA or India Pale Ale comes from?
So I can't take the win on this because I know it was for export to India, but why it would be preferable, I mean, I presume that it has got something to do with how hot it was in India, and therefore you wanted this is before lager was invented, so it would be a more refreshing drink than a pint of heavy or a pint of best or even obviously a pint of stout. But I don't know that. I don't know that bit for sure. What the reason why it was preferable to have that kind of beer as opposed to the other beers that would have been available at the time, because you could have small beer, couldn't you?
Yeah.
When you could have a very low alcohol content, which they drank instead of water, effectively, because you'd get cholera from the water. So what is Indian about India Pale Ale?
Yeah, that's what my kind of.
I like it.
Curiosity is,
yeah. No, mine too. Now, I mean, it must have been something to do with the East India Company and when we were exporting loads of stuff to India. But why did they need a special beer? Thank you, mate. Thank you. Do you like a pint of IPA? Do you?
I do. Yeah, I do have a drop now and again. Yeah,
they're a very nice, It's a very mixed bag. There was one last night. I didn't have it in the end. It was in a Fuller's pub. It was a tropical IPA. So I don't know what the actual criteria are that make it an IPA as opposed to something else. Then you get the American IPAs, like what's the one I like called? It's just proving Eli's point from the last conversation. There's a goose one, isn't there? That's nice. Anyway, I don't know what is the definition of an IPA, but also what's it got to do with India? Mind how you go, Gary. Thank you. 20 minutes to 1 is the time. 03 Sierra Nevada. Oh, thank goodness for that. I was getting worried. I do like a Sierra Nevada, particularly on draft. Also something you get in a Fuller's pubs. I do think Fuller's pubs are the best pubs in London, by the way. I make no apology. Yeah, no, I do. Don't look at me like that. Delicious. Good food as well. Alex is in Gibraltar. Alex, question or answer?
Oh, no, I've moved to Radlett now.
Have you really? And you're still on Gibraltar on our screen?
Yeah. And you know why we've moved, don't you, James?
Brexit, mate.
No.
Why?
We've got to be eligible for the board game, haven't we?
So, I see. So you're actually in Radlett. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Are you?
No. We have moved to Radlett.
Okay. Well, now you are eligible to win the board game. That's it's quite a big life decision to make, just to access something that you could buy yourself for $19.99. But who am I to question your reasoning? Who am I to quibble? Go on then.
One reason of a long list. It's a question, James. It's my wife's question.
Let's have it. Yes.
The question is, why do we pass wind more as we age?
I don't think that's true.
I mean, I appreciate this is anecdotal. I've not read an academic study that says it is, but from anecdotal,
I don't think it's true.
Family, friends.
Do you?
Well,
did you go to boarding school?
I didn't know.
See, I think that gives you an insight. That there's always a few lads. There's always a few lads. If you share a room with 14 other teenage boys, holy moly!
No, but that's different. That's different. That's intentional monkeying around, isn't it? That's not the same as that's different to changes in, I don't know, capacity to
physiognomy, to digestion.
Yeah, well,
I wouldn't have thought physically if you're eating. Well, the only real answer would be that you're eating more food, because the chemical processes of digestion would just cause an increase in gas.
Well, you're just not as good at it. You're not as good at digesting.
No, it won't be that. It will be. You're bigger. No? You're bigger. You've got. I don't know, but I don't think there'll be a reason that's linked to age. I'll put it on the board. Why does Alex fart more? The older he gets is what we're really asking here, isn't it?
Well, or does he?
Well, I think, seeing as it's your wife's question, I think we can be fairly confident that you do, mate.
Well, I think that's probably
your diet gets worse. You're drinking alcohol when you're older. You're not drinking alcohol when you're younger.
Well, I drink less alcohol now. Maybe that's I don't know.
What, than when you were 8?
Less than I used to. Well, no, I drink the same now as I did when I was 8.
Very difficult childhood, clearly. All right, you're on the board. Why did we break wind more as we get older? Working on the presumption that we do, which may be challenged, but we'll accept it for the purpose of this question. Thank you, Alex. Welcome back to Blighty from your travels. So flatulence, IPA, information retention, aching muscles, darts, and seagulls. Brian's in Cannock. Brian, question or answer?
It's an answer, James.
Carry on, Brian.
Right, so this is an answer to the memory question.
Oh, I can't remember that. What was it again? Sorry.
So basically memory is hugely complex, but
yes.
To keep it simple, there are essentially 2 types of memory, short-term and long-term.
Yes.
Right? So short-term memory, you have to repeat the item in your head over and over and over again to keep it in memory. Long-term memory is created by the connection of neurons to each other.
Yes.
And there are probably, I'm sure there is probably a finite limit to the number of neural connections that you can get, but to all intents and purposes, there isn't.
I understand. So theoretically there probably is, but we're never going to reach it.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. So basically, the more that you use a particular item of information, every time you use it, that neural network is strengthened. So the more that you use a piece of information, the more likely it is you'll remember it. As you get older, what happens is that if you don't use the information, the neural networks start to gradually break down, and eventually you forget that piece of information.
Yeah.
Right. So as you get older, obviously you've got more and more information that you can forget, and if you haven't used it for a long time, you're going to forget more and more.
I like to memorise poems. I usually have about 10 at my fingertips, and some of them, the ones that I memorised first at school, they're never going to go. They're so embedded now in my memory that I can recite them now. But the ones that I've learnt latterly, if I don't refresh my memory quite frequently, then I find that I've forgotten them again.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Qualifications?
I'm a retired clinical psychologist.
That'll do nicely. That's a brilliant answer, and it gets you a round of applause. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much. And that addresses Eli's question, which I was particularly keen to get an answer to today. Thank you. 12:46 is the time.
This is LBC Mystery Hour with James O'Brien. Call 0345 6060 973.
12:49 is the time. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the Mystery Hour continues. Let's crack on, and we need answers. Don't ring me about IPA. Listen, seriously, stop what you're doing now. Don't ring about the IPA question, because we're not going to get any other answers. Beer is a bit like motoring. The enthusiasm levels are off the charts. I think we've got an answer on IPA, and it's probably not true, oddly. A friend of mine who's a landlord has been in touch, but I won't let that spoil the parade. Don't ring. Stop it. Don't ring me about IPA. I need questions to the answers of whether. I need answers to the questions even of whether the seagulls in Brighton are really more aggressive than the seagulls in Bournemouth, and if so, why? Did they do anything to check the darts skills of the non-darts playing partner in a bullseye team? 0345 6060 973. Why do our muscles ache when we've got flu or a cold virus? And do we break wind more as we get older? Those are the ones that I need answers to. All right. Miguel is in Milton Keynes. Miguel, question or answer?
Hello, James. Here's a question.
Carry on.
I was watching the Portugal game against Liechtenstein the other day.
Yes.
And to my surprise, the national anthem from Liechtenstein sounds exactly like the God Save the King.
Are you sure? Are you sure?
Exactly.
Well, I think we should check.
Please do.
You speak truth, Miguel.
Yes.
And you want to know why?
Yes.
Yes.
Why?
It's a perfectly reasonable question. O Ben am Jungen Rhein. O Ben am Jungen Rhein. Go on.
I don't know the lyrics.
I mean, high on the young Rhine.
Young Rhine?
Young Rhine. The river, high on the young Rhine, like the early bit. So Liechtenstein, the Rhine is quite new when it's in Liechtenstein. So high on the young Rhine. O Ben am Jungen Rhein.
Mm-hmm. But why? I just don't get it. Why it's so similar, the music?
The answer is that lots of them did. I think Liechtenstein's the only one that still does. But I think the Prussian national anthem in sort of Bismarck's time might have been the same tune as well. There's no reason why it shouldn't. There's no reason why it shouldn't be, really.
Yes, true. Yeah.
Just they liked it. I don't know whether they liked the English one and put their own words to it, or whether it has something to do with the fact that the Kaiser and the King were cousins, but I mean,
yes.
Just sort of thought, I like that. We'll have a bit of that. We'll put our own words to it.
Maybe.
German-speaking nations. German-speaking nations had it as a.
German-speaking nations. Okay.
I mean,
okay.
I mean, that's it, really.
Okay.
But your ears did not. Your ears did not deceive you.
No, we didn't. That's why we were ready to have dinner, and suddenly
what's going on? They're supposed to be playing Liechtenstein, not England. You thought to yourself,
well, not England.
Yes,
exactly.
That was strange. I'll give myself a round of applause because I don't think I've had any yet today.
You deserve.
No, you're right. Thank you. But there might. It is apparently my second one. But if there is another answer to it, then we'll get that. Well, we probably won't because we're out of time. Andrew's in Blackburn. Andrew, question or answer?
It's an answer, James.
Let's make it snappy if we can.
The pale ale, India Pale Ale question.
Yes.
Why is it called India Pale Ale? It's because it was originally brewed in around about the 1820s, 1830s for export to India. In fact, it used to be called Pale Ale for India. And they over-hopped it and they made it slightly a bit more alcoholic because both hops and alcohol have preservative effects. And they were finding that normal beer would spoil during the 4, 5, 6 month sail, because this was in the days of galleon ships, and they were only stored in wooden casks. So they would over-hop the beer, and they would also make it slightly more alcoholic to survive the journey.
That'll do.
When the diplomats from the East India Company came back to the UK, they liked over-hop beer, and they wanted to drink it in the UK, so it started becoming available here.
So it caught on here. Qualifications?
Called India Pale Ale. I'm a home brewer.
Fantastic.
I'm also writing a book on the history of beer.
Are you really? Oh, send me a copy. Send me a copy when you're finished.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a mixture of homebrew, how to homebrew, different styles of beer. And before I give you the recipe, I'll tell you all about the history of that style of beer.
That sounds an absolutely fascinating read. Have a round of applause on me.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much. Some rather sad news. Alistair Darling, who, of course, was Chancellor under Gordon Brown at the time of the financial crisis and a Member of Parliament from 1987 until stepping down just in 2015, has died at the age of 70, his family have just announced. So quite it's one of those days where quite a lot of people seem to, prominent people seem to be passing away. If you're just joining me, Alistair Darling, the former Treasury Minister, the former Chancellor of the Exchequer and Scottish Secretary, had been in the House of Lords since 2015, has died at the age of 70. 5 minutes to 1 is the time. Nick's in Hastings. Nick, question or answer?
Oh, it's not for James. Hi there. Second-time caller.
Carry on.
The answer is, I lived in Bournemouth for 21 years when I was younger.
Oh, yeah.
The answer is that there are different species.
Of seagull? Seriously?
Yeah.
Okay.
The Bournemouth ones, I believe, are common gulls. I might be wrong on that one, but I believe they're common gulls. Come along the coast, Brighton. I live in Hastings now, which sort of gives me the difference. The seagulls here and in Brighton are herring gulls.
Oh, okay.
They are about twice the size, very, very aggressive. And probably, it may be wrong, but it could be the fishing industry. We have a fishing industry in Hastings. There isn't one in Bournemouth.
Yeah.
So the herring gulls will chase the fishing boats.
They will chase the trawlers, as Eric Cantona famously observed.
Well, exactly, yeah. And they also steal your fish and chips and generally mug you.
So it does make some sense then. It will be a species-based distinction. I love that. And your qualifications are that you've lived in both places.
Yeah, I lived in both. Yeah, we also get the common gulls here, and they sort of hang around right at the end of the town, and they sort of don't disturb anyone, really.
No. Right, round of applause, please, for Nick. That's a lovely answer on the gulls question for Finbar. Robin's in Manchester. Robin, question or answer?
I've got an answer, James.
Carry on.
The myalgia, the pain, muscle pain, aches and pains of flu. It's called myalgia, which is an inflammation of the muscles.
Oh, yes.
And when you get infected by a virus, your body obviously fights off that virus to get rid of it.
Yes.
That involves white blood cells joining onto the virus, which then actually targets them for attack from the body's immune response. But part of that, it creates a sort of cascade of inflammatory chemicals called cytokines, and they are a bit of an irritant elsewhere in the body, so they cause inflammation within the muscle cells and the lining of the joint cells, so you get the aches and pains of the joint and muscles.
Qualifications?
I am a doctor that you once called Dr. Fingers.
Dr. Fingers. Round of applause for Dr. Fingers, please. Yeah, I'm not explaining that. I haven't got time. Laura's in Woking. Laura, question or answer?
It's an answer.
Carry on.
Yeah, it's to the bullseye question.
Oh, sensational. Go on.
Yeah, so just bear with me. A little bit nervous, more than I should be for an answer.
It's only me.
Yeah, but yeah, you're pretty much right. I don't really think there was any checking system as to how good the non-playing dart player was. It was more to do with how they answered the questions. I mean, there's been instances of kind of top-level county players and other types of players both playing in the same team at bullseye. But I think it was more to do with kind of how you were in terms of answering the questions.
What are your qualifications?
I am a dart player. I went through the process of bullseye.
Did you?
For the more recent revival, but I've played at the World Championships, so they wouldn't let me on it.
Even as the darts partner, you weren't allowed to play if you were too good?
Well, if you've seen me play, you may disagree, but and I do commentary for Sky Sports Darts. So
I've just found you on Twitter. Laura Turner, you are. I sounded like Yoda then. I don't know why I said Laura. But someone else has replied to you. I don't know if you saw it, remembering when the non-dart player stepped up and hit 2 treble 19 straight off. So there was no limit on how. So that's Rob Told, isn't it? Who asked the question. You would not pick someone who was brilliant at darts. You would pick someone who was brilliant at questions, and if they happened to be good at darts, then you were golden. You were over the line.
Absolute bonus.
Thank you, Laura. Big round of applause. I'm going to give it to Rob, who asked the bullseye question. Actually, that was probably my favourite. I haven't got time for the Shane McGowan thing, so I may do something tomorrow. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. All of LBC's shows are there, as well as the world's biggest podcasts. Pause and rewind live radio on Global Player, where you're always in control. Get it from your app store or just go straight to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick. At 6 this evening, I will be at Foyles on Charing Cross Road signing books for your Christmas stockings with lots and lots of other authors. So do try and come along to that if you can. But now it's time for Sheila Fogarty. 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 But now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.